Morning, everybody. We're going to get started a whole 1 minute early in an effort to try to keep us ahead of schedule all day. So, all right. And now we are just on time. So we're already behind schedule now. So appreciate everyone showing up today. Joint Transportation Military Affairs Committee Day 1. We're going to be dealing with YDOT. As we start the meeting, I want to call your attention to the committee's rules of decorum. Copies of the decorum rules are located with the hard copies of the agenda and are available for review on the legislative website. We note these rules at the beginning of each meeting just as a simple reminder that everyone in attendance be treated courteous and with complete respect, whether that's on this side of the dais or on that side of the dais. We are open to the public, and so all points of view are legitimate, and we expect that everybody, regardless of those discussions, be treated courteously and with respect. I'd like to take a minute to read through the listed decorum rules, but I'm going to highlight just a few of these. Although it may seem awkward and a little bit goofy at times, especially when members of the committee are asking you a direct question, please make sure that you are addressing through the chair, and I will make sure that we keep that flow of conversation back and forth between members of the committee, as well as any testimony from agencies and or the public. Comments will be directed at the issue under discussion, and anything outside of that are out of order, and I don't suspect it'll be an issue, but we will make sure that that is maintained. Speakers will avoid personal criticism. Again, I will gavel that down. We will not have any personal discussions or any personal attacks on members of the committee. We're here to do the work for the people of Wyoming. For audience members, we expect that you'll refrain from any behavior that disrupts orderly conduct. So speaking out of line, making sure that your phones are turned off. If you have to take a phone call, please just take it outside. Pretty easy stuff. And then one of the biggest things, we don't typically see it in the Transportation Committee, but clapping, cheering, jeering when somebody says something good. Let's try to keep that to a minimum if we can when we're talking about roads. I totally get where the excitement comes on that. So general guidelines, guys, just be adults. That's all it boils down to. So with that, as we get ready to go, I'll go ahead and have LSO call roll call, please.
Senator Brennan.
Excused.
Senator Furphy.
Here.
Senator Kolb.
Present.
Senator Pappas.
Here.
Representative Berger.
Here.
Representative Nymek.
Here.
Representative Obermueller.
Here.
Representative Ahern.
Here.
Representative Pendergraft.
Here.
Representative Smith.
Here.
Representative Stivar.
Present.
Representative Wiley.
Here.
Co-Chairman Boner.
Here.
Chairman Brown.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you so much. A couple of quick housekeeping items as well. First and foremost, I want to thank LSO and Chairman Boner, who really picked up a lot of slack from my side of things over this past last meeting and into this meeting. Chairing a couple other committees, my ability to hit this one as hard as I was able to was not there. So Chairman Boner, thank you for your help. LSL, thank you guys for the amount of bill drafts you guys have created for us. I know that's a lot of work on your end, so thank you. And then the last piece of item, after watching enough of these committee meetings, I don't know if you guys all do it like I do, but please make sure you use your microphone. It's very, very difficult when we have members of any body not utilizing their microphone and a question gets asked and then answered by somebody. We have no idea what the question was. So please just make sure you're using your microphone. It's helpful for everybody involved. And with that, we can move. Yes, Representative Berger.
Mr. Chairman, privilege?
Sure.
Yep. I just want to thank all the people who work to keep this facility clean and beautiful. It's just wonderful to walk into such a great facility. The outside looks great. The lawn is very green, but more importantly, the indoors is just really nice, and I appreciate everybody's effort to keep this just a great facility. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Representative Berger. And with that, we are 1 minute still ahead of schedule. So I'm going to go ahead. We're going to start this off with the Fuel Tax Administration. And is this you, Brian? All right, Mr. Fuller, please, the floor is yours.
Yep, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Brian Fuller, LSO. You just have it's 2-03 in the meeting materials. You have a summary on the history of the fuel tax administration process. Really, the high points I would just note, the first part of that summary outlines who has been responsible for administering the fuel tax in Wyoming. It's currently the Department of Transportation, whereas other taxes, all other taxes, in fact, are administered by the Department of Revenue, except for approximately 45-year period or 35-year period. The Department of Transportation or its predecessor has been responsible for that. YDOT has rulemaking authority to administer all three fuel taxes: gasoline, diesel, and alternative fuels. The fuel tax is presumed to be a direct tax on the ultimate consumer. There are requirements for licensure for each supplier, refiner, distributor, and a bond requirement as well. The memo outlines the collections process, the reports that suppliers and refiners and others must provide, and records. That process is generally identical across all three fuel taxes. The primary difference are the types of fuel. For the alternative fuel tax, statute defines what those alternative fuels are, and the use of gallon equivalents. For natural gas and electricity, it's a gasoline gallon equivalent. For liquefied natural gas and renewable diesel, it's a diesel gallon equivalent, and all of that is spelled out in the memo. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to cover more specifics or answer questions however you see fit.
Committee, one of the other topics I'll just bring up just for your guys' consideration as well is I've instructed LSO to not necessarily go line by line and read everything. Some of your other committee chairmen may be doing that, but I think we've all kind of understood the expectation that there's a packet of information. You guys get paid for a half a day's work to review it. I don't feel like it's necessary and worth our time to have LSO read through everything that they've already prepared for us. But with that, is there any questions on the memo? No questions from the committee on the memo. Brian, thank you very much for that. I believe that brings us over to Director Westby. Director Westby, if you want to take the hot seat, welcome. Congratulations on the official nod. Welcome to your second meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, Darren Westby, not interim director, I'm director. Still, as was reminded, albeit I might be appointed by the governor, I'm still not Senate confirmed, so. But thank you for your time, and hopefully over the last couple months since our last meeting, you were able to get the opportunity to gather our packet that came in, all the information, we call them do-outs, obviously, things that came up in the last meeting, questions that arose. Hopefully we were able to tackle those to the level that you guys appreciated, and looking forward to today's presentation. With that, Mr. Chairman, if it's your pleasure, I'd like to turn it over to Dennis Byrne to kind of go over something that did get submitted in the packet, the fuel tax administration presentation through YDOT, to kind of explain a little bit of how we do it, why we do it, what we get, and then stand for any questions.
Certainly. Thank you, Director. Mr. Byrne, if you'll please introduce yourself for the record, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, committee members. My name is Dennis Byrne. I'm the Chief Financial Officer with YDOT. I do have a couple of additional folks here with me this morning. At the far right of the table, my right, is Wayne Hassinger. He is the Fuel Tax Program Manager. And then to my left is Kim Peters. She is the Deputy Fuel Tax Manager. So if there's any really hard questions, they get to field them. Mr. Chairman, I think we have, can you folks hear me okay? So we have just a small presentation here for you. This really is just general information related to fuel tax, how it's collected, what's collected, and where the distribution goes. For your convenience, I think it's up on the screen if you don't have a copy of it in front of you, but I do believe we provided a copy to you folks. So I'll go ahead and kick it off and get started. Slide 1, Mr. Chairman. This is just a motor fuel collection trend. So this goes back 9 years, 2014. The top kind of gold bar that you see there, that's diesel collections, actual collections. since 2014. You can see that it's been very flat. We actually ran a trend line there. That's the line in green. And I don't think you could get that line any flatter. So it really has been flat over the past 9 years. We chose 2014 because that was the first full year that we collected the additional 10 cents that the legislature had approved in statute. So at the bottom of that graph, actually in the middle of the graph there, you can see the blue line. That blue line again just indicates gasoline collections. Again, very, very flat collections since 2014. Again, these are actual collections. Nothing is adjusted here for inflation. So if you think about this, the amount of inflation that we've experienced in 2014, really the revenues aren't keeping up with our ability to our buying power. So just something to keep in mind there. Slide 2. This is Wyoming and the surrounding states, the current gasoline and diesel fuel tax rates for those surrounding states. You guys have seen this. We provide it in our budget presentations every year. We update this. You can see that Wyoming, with the exception of Colorado's, is on the lower end of the actual fuel tax collection rates in our surrounding region. As I mentioned a minute ago, at the bottom left of the slide there, you can see that the last fuel tax increase was July 1, 2013, and it was a 10-cent increase on both gasoline and diesel fuel.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Senator Pappas.
might I point out to the committee that the reason Colorado's tax is so low is they can't raise taxes down there. They have to do it, the people have to do it at the ballot box. But they do have many, many fees. And so while that is low, understand that they put fees on everything. For instance, I was just talking to the chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee in Colorado, Faith Winters, and she told me they just raised their delivery charge for Amazon, 27 cents a package, now to 28 cents a package. Everything down there gets a delivery fee. If it uses the roads, it gets a delivery fee. So don't let that low tax, they get their money through fees.
Thank you, Senator. Dennis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Down at the bottom right hand of that slide, we're just pointing out the last time the federal fuel tax rate was increased, and that was 30 years ago, essentially. The gasoline, the federal rate is 18.4 cents, and the diesel rate is 24.4 cents. Just for information for you folks.
Dennis, question on that. Just if I remember right, there was a discussion, the last bill that passed through Congress, there was a discussion about raising the fuel tax, and that was ultimately stripped. Do you remember by any chance what that was looking at? Because that was going to be funding for the infrastructure deal. That was kind of what they were looking at, but I'm just kind of curious. I think the committee might benefit from it. Hey, if we wanted to raise it 5 cents, there's the topic that the feds were looking at X.
Mr. Chairman, I did look over that, but at the moment it's escaping me unless either Kim or Wayne remembers the exact amount. But what we'll do, Mr. Chairman, is do some investigation and get that information back. I just don't remember it off the top of my head at this point. Sure. Mr. Chairman, moving on, slide number 3. So this really is the 2024, this is what we're anticipating to collect in fiscal year 2024 on specific to gasoline tax. What we're looking at right now based on our estimates is a total of $82.5 million. And then below that headline there, you can see how that distribution will work. So right off the top, there are distributions to state parks for motorboats, off-road vehicles, and snowmobiles. And then once that distribution is complete, the second distribution that happens is what we refer to, and it's kind of mid-graph there in the red. It's called the LUST fee. That is leaking underground storage tax. That fee is collected by YDOT. It is kept by YDOT, but a like amount is transferred from the over-the-cap severance tax to the Department of Environmental Quality for landfill remediation and leaking underground storage tanks. So again, YDOT keeps that amount, but a like amount is transferred to DEQ. After those two distributions are taken care of, then the rest is by statute distributed via the distributions you see here. So the cities get 15%, the county road fund gets 14, the counties get 13.5, and then the state highway fund gets 57.5% of the total gasoline tax collected.
Chairman Boner.
And just especially when we're talking about the distribution to local entities, is that a pure percentage basis? It's not anything similar to, say, a severance tax distribution where it's, you know, up to a certain amount, you get, you know, this amount of percentage, and if it goes over amount, it's simply whatever the total is a percentage regardless of the amount. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. Senator Boner, it is just a flat percentage distribution. So moving on to slide number 4, this is just the diesel tax forecast for what the collections are anticipated to be in fiscal year 24. Now I'm saying fiscal year 24, keep in mind that's YDOT's fiscal year, October to September, just so that we're on the same page there. So with regard to the diesel tax collections and distributions, again, there's a fuel tax admin fee that by statute, YDOT can keep up to 2% of the total collections, you know, in order to operate Wayne and Kim's program for the collection of the fuel taxes statewide. Currently, Mr. Chairman, we are not collecting the full 2%. And the reason for that is we're collecting the 2% on the original 13-cent fuel tax. When the legislature chose to increase it by 10 cents back in July 1 of 2013, at the time, the increased cost in the fuel tax did not generate additional administrative fees at the time. So we chose not to collect the full 2% of the total, but only continue to collect it on the 13 cents. Now, with inflation, Mr. Chairman, we're probably, you know, with raises and inflation since, you know, at least 10 years ago, we're probably going to have to start to collect up to the full 2% of what's allowed in statute regarding that fuel tax distribution for admin.
Yes, Representative Pendergraft, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see trucks running up and down that haven't apportioned the license plate. And my understanding is it doesn't necessarily matter where they buy the fuel, that is apportioned to different states. Could you take a minute and kind of bring me up to speed on exactly how that works? Because this says we collected $87 million. Is that what was gathered in the state, or is that through the apportion process? I'm not clear.
Mr. Chairman, good question. To answer the last question first, this is just fuel tax on gallons of fuel sold in Wyoming. What you're referring to is IFTA, the International Fuel Tax Administration, and you are correct. It doesn't matter where fuel is purchased. It matters where the fuel is burned. And there are folks behind me that are smarter on this than I am. So if I misstep, I'm sure you'll see some looks and we can invite them up. But basically, wherever the fuel is burned is where the tax belongs. So the tax is collected. Now for Wyoming, I think the last time I looked at the amount that the net amount that Wyoming got for IFTA fuel tax collections last year was around $2.7 million. I think that's about close, Mr. Chairman, so.
Okay, follow up. Sorry, just a quick follow up. So this 87 is money that we collected within the state that stays within the state?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just.
Senator Culp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question about the administrative costs going up. I mean, because we're talking about percentages of recouping that the tax money for administrative purposes. How much has it gone up? I mean, say if we got 20% inflation or whatever for administration, what does that equate to for percentage change of the fuel tax needs for administrative purposes? Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to boil it down to percentages. Right now, we're collecting the 2% on the 13 cents, which equals roughly $1 million. And so that was covering cost in Wayne and Kim's program up until about last year or the beginning of this year. It's gone up probably another 200,000 to 300,000. And so let's call it a third of what we were collecting. So 2% on 13 cents, we'll need to collect, what we're trying to do is keep it even. We're only trying to collect as much as it's necessary to run the program. So, probably another third of what we're already collecting. So not even the full 2% on the 24 cents.
Does that answer your questions?
On the other 10, yeah.
Okay. And just to make sure I'm understanding that correctly, that's not an additional collection on top of that. That is just coming out of the taxes that you guys are assessing, right?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
I just want to make sure that anybody who's listening out there and
Yeah.
the world understands that you guys are not going to be assessing additional fees to gas. This is just everything that you guys are collecting, you guys are allowed to take a portion of that off the top to run the program.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct, and it's a good segue. You can see here that the $918,000 that we're talking about comes off the top of the current distribution. And then again, in the green on this chart, we have the less distribution. Again, same discussion as the gasoline. YDOT receives that full amount. A like amount goes to DEQ. Then after those two distributions are made, the cities get 5% of the diesel collection, counties get 20%, and the state highway fund gets 75%, Mr. Chairman. Yes.
And
that
so
is what's
just
left.
again, to make sure we're crystal clear on this, that $1 million and any amount that you guys will need to adjust, whether it's 200, 300,000, that 1.2 million is now going to be an additional 1.2 million that will not be able to be utilized for roads. So call it a mile of asphalt or a mile of concrete.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, it would actually be an additional 300,000 above what we're already collecting on the 918. But yes, that is money that would not be available for pavement.
Okay. Looks good. Continue on.
Mr. Chairman, moving on to slide 5 here, we have a few tables here, just kind of gives you some information related to what an increase of 1 penny in the fuel tax would generate and who it would generate the revenue for. So I'm going to start down at the very bottom right of this chart. If you increased both diesel and gasoline by 1 cent, it generates approximately $6.9 million in total. Those are broken down between YDOT, cities, counties, county road, and state parks as we just went through those distributions. So if you're talking about just a penny to what that means to YDOT is about $4.5 million for every penny the legislature, if it so chose to increase the fuel tax, that's what YDOT's benefit would be. And then you can see the other distributions there along that line. I won't call them out specifically. Now, if you were to just increase diesel, of course, it's 2.6 million. If you were just to increase gasoline, it'd be 1.8 million. The second table on that page is our best estimate of who actually pays for the tax. So the second chart shows that in gasoline, specific to gasoline, about 85% of the revenue generated from gasoline tax is paid by Wyoming citizens. Approximately 15% is paid by non-residents. Now, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to be clear, this is not, this could vary a little bit. And the way we really kind of collect that information is very brief traffic counts, looking at counting license plates. So it's not a foolproof method, but it's the only way we have to really kind of generically estimate how much is being collected from Wyoming residents versus non-residents. That reverses a little bit with regard to diesel. You can see Wyoming residents pay, our estimate is about 38% of the total revenues collected with regard to diesel fuel collections, and non-residents about 62%. And then this chart here at the bottom, this table really just shows the per penny increase of Wyoming residents versus non-residents, what they're paying in terms of total fuel collections. You can see that Wyoming residents are paying approximately 60% of the total on a per penny basis. Non-residents are paying about 2.6 million or about 30% of the total. And then, of course, the total $6.8 million. Mr. Chairman, that kind of sums it up for the fuel tax piece. What I'd like to do is turn to the next slide, which is slide 6. And we added a little bit of information here with regard to the electric vehicle registration fees. We thought it would be helpful for the committee to understand what Wyoming's charging versus what surrounding states are charging specific to EV registration fees. I'm not going to go over all of these.
Representative Berger?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Before you move on, I just have one question about when you get your percentage, when the department gets that 75% of just the tax on fuels, does that go into your general fund, or do you say that that money goes into road construction, or how is that divvied in your department?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Good question. The total distribution goes to the highway fund. How we use it is based on the constitutional limitations of the use of fuel tax, specifically gasoline. And we can use that for road construction, road maintenance. We can use it for the enforcement of traffic laws, and we can use it for the administration of those activities. So that's where we focus all of the highway use. We refer to them as highway user fees, which includes not just fuel tax, but registration, vehicle registrations, oversized weight, oversized load permits. All of that is used based on the constitutional limitations.
Any other questions? Okay. Oh, yes, Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hope I'm on the right page here. On the EV fees. Now, you have a Utah note. At the end of the note, it said the tax may be based on kilowatt hours sold. What does that mean? I mean, does that mean you don't know?
Mr. Chairman, that is actually how it is written in Utah statute. So it's not our lack of understanding any more than the general lack of understanding of how it may be collected. Yeah.
Okay. Let's go ahead and have you walk through the EV slide if you would, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you can see that Wyoming's EV registration fee is higher than other surrounding states. There's a couple of things to point out. One, other states do have, in addition to the registration fee, they also have EV taxation. Where we could find that, we included that in like Montana and Idaho. Montana, for instance, has a 3 cent per kilowatt hour public station related charge on EV charging. 3 cents, Mr. Chairman, seems to be kind of the national standard at this point. There's some variation, but 3 cents seems to be what folks talk about nationally with regard to a per kilowatt charge. The EV fees generate, down at the bottom of the page, generate about $152,200 annually on the current 761 registered electric vehicles in Wyoming, just to give you context on the revenue that's currently being collected off that $200 fee. So, Mr. Chairman, I really don't have anything else to point out here unless there are specific questions.
We will we'll discuss this one a little bit later, but yes, Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the Wyoming EV fee, that includes hybrids currently?
I will turn it over to Ms. Peters, Mr. Chairman.
No, it does not.
And Ms. Peters, if you can just introduce yourself for the record, please.
Hello, I'm Kimberly Peters from Fuel Tax Administration, YDOT.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, it does not include the hybrid.
Okay. Any further questions from the committee?
Mr. Chairman, we just one more slide for you folks this morning with regard to this topic that's on page 7. And really just from a fuel tax administration perspective, just to give you an idea of what we're looking for and what we're anticipating with regard to the future. It really is, from our perspective, it's important that we continue to effectively and efficiently administer the tax. And we constantly look for ways to streamline the process to make it a little bit more easy for our customers, the folks that are paying the fuel tax, to be able to submit, remit, and process what they need to process. That's an ongoing thing that we like to pride ourselves on. It's not perfect, never will be, but it is something that is first and foremost in our mind. We're also paying close attention to what's happening nationally, analyzing trends and trying to figure out what might be next. An important item to consider is that as a taxing agency, it's critical that we're fair and equitable. So we think about that as we administer this program. And what does fairness and equitability look like? Now, it's obviously, we don't set policy. We certainly just make recommendations, but that's where our mindset is, Mr. Chairman. On a broader scale, there's, as fuel prices increase, alternative fuels seem to be more attractive. That could be LNG, it could be hydrogen. Hydrogen's the next thing. It seems to be popular. It seems to be less fuel time than electricity, although electricity is talked about, continually, and that's all we really hear about. We think that hydrogen could be one of those fuels that is really kind of gain some market share in the coming years. So, and then on an even broader ability, we're really thinking about sustainability in terms of being able to maintain our roads given our current revenue streams. That's all revenue streams, including fuel tax and highway user fees, and what we have to do to most effectively and efficiently maintain those roads. I can tell you, Mr. Chairman, that inflation, as it's impacted everyone in the state, is certainly impacting our ability to maintain the roads in their current condition. We've seen construction costs increase significantly over the last year. I think our chief engineer can probably speak to that more than I can, or maybe even the director. Yeah, in some regards, up to 50% in some of the construction costs. So it's important to us to always be as lean as we can and be as efficient as we can, because inflation is very impactful to our operations. And Mr. Chairman, that is it for me, unless there are additional questions.
Dennis, just a quick question that I had, and something that I've been thinking about, is the idea of taking away the flat charge on a fuel tax and charging it as a sales tax in effect. So that way it kind of keeps up with the inflationary adjustments. Has that been anything you guys have looked into, and how that would have adjusted and what that might look like for you guys?
Mr. Chairman, very good question. To answer the question, yes, we have looked at it. And to your point, sales tax, it is inflation proof, essentially, right? Because you're taking the amount based on the price of the cost of fuel. So there's certainly going to be downtimes when fuel is less expensive, say 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, compared to today, where the extreme inflation that we're seeing, we would be somewhat keeping up with that inflation based on a sales tax versus a flat tax.
Okay. And have you guys modeled that, what that would have done comparatively to where you guys are at? When we look at, what you guys have showed us over the past 5-6 years, the reduction in what our available funds are, to take care of our roads. We say it's inflationary proof, but I'm just kind of curious if that would have actually put us in a position where we wouldn't be as far behind, or what that level of behind would look like.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have done some modeling in the past. It's nothing that we've done recently, so I can't speak to how we would be performing exactly today versus the inflation that we're experiencing today. We've taken snapshots and kind of looked at what that would mean to us. Certainly in a better position in something that adjusts for inflation versus something that doesn't, but I couldn't tell you that we would be absolutely caught up with inflation at this point. That statement I can't make.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Yes, Senator Pappas.
Yeah. Could you tell me, I know we did had a consultant look at where we are as far as our funds a couple of years ago, I think it was, and it showed that we were underwater by a certain amount. Can you bring back to my memory what that amount was, and whether you've adjusted that amount since the report was made? Because I know we're not keeping up, and almost no one across the country is. They're dipping into other sources because the gas tax is just unsustainable. But can you just remind the committee where we were when we had that consultant look at it, and if you've adjusted those numbers for today?
Mr. Chair.
This is a good follow-up to what I was just talking about, maybe good information for the rest of the committee as well.
Absolutely. The short answer is yes, we have done that. So just some refresher for the committee. We conducted a study by an independent consultant back in 2020. It was Dye Management. They came in and looked at our needs across the entire organization. So it wasn't just highways, it was patrol, it was aeronautics, communications, our fleet, our buildings. At the time, based on the 2019 numbers, we were $354.3 million annually short of really needs, not wants, but needs in terms of meeting our mission across the entire spectrum of the organization. What we did do was, fast forward a little bit to IDJA, where we actually received a little more federal dollars in the last federal bill. That provided us roughly about an additional $100 million of federal funding. So what we were saying at the time was we took that into account, right? It's fair. We got more federal dollars needed to add that into the equation. So at one point we were about 264 million a year short in needs. Now what has happened since then is inflation, some extraordinary inflationary costs that we've seen. Directors mentioned it, I've mentioned it. And so we're actually finishing up the numbers now for our fiscal year 2024 budget presentation. So I don't have the exact number with me now, but that brought us back up. That inflationary impact brought us back up to about $400 million a year unfunded needs. So IDJA helped, the extra federal dollars helped considerably, but the inflation is very impactful, as everyone knows.
Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So out of that shortcoming of finances, where does it impact our citizens the most?
Mr. Chairman, from my perspective and my opinion, I think the director will want to chime in here, but certainly it impacts them on the roads. You're seeing more delay times, you're seeing more potholes, you're seeing roads that are in worse condition than they have been in the past. It's hard for us to maintain those roads at a 2019 even level, which I think the engineers would say wasn't adequate then either. But so they're going to experience it in wear and tear on vehicles, damage to vehicles as they drive the road, in the smoothness of the road and their ability to get around. So that's how our citizens are feeling the impact. I think I will turn it over to the director because I think he's got some additional things to say.
Director, please.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, great question, and we struggle with this every day. And just recently, and Representative O'Hearn and Senator Pappas can both attest, we cut $70 million out of our STIP bid lettings earlier this year because we just did not have the funds due to inflation. So those $70 million worth of projects did not happen. And so those projects get pushed to next year, which means that we're pushing projects further down the line. And so those projects could be impactful to the quality of life of the citizens and the traveling public.
Follow up?
Yep, follow up, please.
So is there a list of like priorities, like, okay, we need to allocate X amount for winter snow versus summer mowing? Because I know with the exponential rain, I've gotten a lot of complaints from farmers that you can't see oncoming traffic at intersections because the weeds are taller than even the speed limit signs and things like that. So is there like a gauge of safety versus, those kinds of things?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, yes, there is a priority with safety involved. A lot of what you just explained is probably answered by the fact that we're down 300 employees right now, 300 plus employees. Our vacancy rate's relatively high, a little over 15% right now. So it's not necessarily, it could be a funding mechanism in which thankfully you all granted the compensation increase and we're able to see what that is helping with a little bit of the recruitment. But it comes down to a time issue. We have the equipment either sitting there or being purchased. We don't have the manpower to get out and get it done. And so they prioritize that on a level that hopefully will improve that quality of life as well as our traveling public.
And Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question and probably a follow-up after that. Director Westby, you remember last time we spoke, we had a kind of an interesting discussion about cross-training. So we have an issue here where obviously you've cited, or you all have cited inflation as an issue. You've cited being short employees. When was the last time that there was some sort of an efficiency audit of YDOT? It seems like I remember something about that in 2017. Are you able to shed any light on that?
Representative Pendergraft, we'll go into that a little bit later. Right now, I want to make sure that we stay on topic. We're going into the fuel tax, so
This is the topic, Mr. Chairman.
you're
if I
talking an
may-
efficiency study and cross-training
Yeah, if-
employees.
I'm-
So if you can correlate it, we'll go ahead and allow it, but I want to
am-
make sure we're
okay,
staying on
I
topic.
am trying to correlate that.
Okay.
I just want to point out that those who are paying this tax are also affected by the same inflation that we're affected by here. And so when you look at an agency or when you look at a business, either one, you have to look at both sides of the equation. How much money have we got coming in? What assets do we have to do that? And if maybe this is slightly misplaced, but my understanding was there was in 2017 some recommendations made, and I just wanted to know what they were and if they have been addressed. So you determine where that goes. Thank you.
Representative Pendergraft, we will actually talk about that, the agency efficiency evaluation. I believe the director and I've spoken about this as well, that we'll go over some of that information this afternoon, and that'll go over probably what you're looking for in a little bit more detail. Senator Pappas.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. So the numbers that you gave me, great, the 400 million now per year that were estimated underwater, but that's for agency-wide, right? And YDOT, as we all know, is not just highways, although most people think Department of Transportation. But, we have patrol under there, we have, aviation under there, communications, I don't know what else you got under there. You've got a whole bunch of stuff under there. In fact, most states don't have patrol, for instance. I think there's only 5 or 6 states that have patrol under their YDOT. But I would like to know, out of that 400 million, how much of that is allocated to roads and bridges? And the rest, it would be nice to know how much money we're spending in each one of those categories. I don't know if you've got that, but maybe we could get it for a future meeting if we don't have it now. But if you could shed a little light in that direction.
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
So the numbers that I have here are for roads specifically, Senator, are pre-inflationary, so I'll try to do some quick math. But what is still missing from surface transportation, so construction, maintenance, traffic safety, delayed STIP projects that the director mentioned earlier, that was about $120 million. So if we're experiencing 50%-ish inflation in those areas, then you're talking about $180 million.
We've got quite a few questions, so I'm going to keep coming back. I keep seeing hands raised. Representative Berger, and then over to Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to know of that needs list that we're saying that we're behind, and we're behind in a lot of departments, but how does that compare with the national trends? Or even just those states that are around us that we compared for what the taxes are on the fuel taxes?
Mr. Chairman,
Dennis, please.
I don't have exact numbers with me here today. I can tell you other states are, I'm sure, in similar positions where they probably have more need than they have funding. But the one thing that I would like to point out is Other states have invested quite a bit more state funding into roads. And I've got an updated number here, but let me just, for instance, this information comes from the Federal Highway Administration that is supplied by the states. The national average is roughly 69%, let's call it even 65%, just so I'm not overinflating it. Hey, thank you. You got that. Perfect. So the national average is 69% state funding to 31% federal funding. That's the national average. So obviously states are investing significant state dollars. For Wyoming, that's reversed. It's about 28% state funding and 72% federal funding. So Wyoming's relying heavily on federal dollars and probably not investing as much state money as the national average.
I'll just say to follow up on that, it's good that we're getting that federal money back because those are our royalties that we've been paying to the government for a very long time, and we're getting some of that money back into our pockets. So Senator Cole.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll get back to the, I guess, revenue shortfall that we talked about and how it was all lumped in one ball. So I guess for the sake of the public and me and myself for being only on here for a small amount of time, what is the actual, could you supply the actual breakdown of the shortfall? Because when we start convoluting or, throwing in air transportation and whatever, and then we're talking on top of that about taxes for fuel. Although that, I think, I would like to get some clarification on just what the heck is our shortfalls and so we can identify it a little more accurately instead of throwing in these other items.
Mr. Chairman, be happy to do that. It's in our budget presentation. We're updating the budget presentation for the September commission meeting. So that breakout would be part of that presentation. And as soon as we finalize that report, we're happy to send that information to the committee.
And I think it might be helpful, the 2017 study that showed you guys, or the 2020 study from Dye Management that just showed the 360 breakdown. Maybe if you can send that back out to this committee. Again, this committee is incredibly new and probably doesn't have the historical knowledge on what that 360 included. Maybe that before your guys' budget might be helpful for everybody.
Absolutely.
Anybody else? Yes, Representative Wiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and anybody can answer this. Have you guys ever done an analysis or looked at maybe doing some cost savings with opening up some of these services to a bid letting process? I mean, we're talking about we're down 15% on our workforce and stuff. So is it possibly maybe we could do that, open up our parameters to let some of these services out to bid and have some cost savings there? Because then, in my thoughts, maybe that way you could limit some overhead, maybe not invest in so much new equipment and stuff, and you could put that process out annually, to have competitive bids from the private sector to fill in some of those gaps.
And I'll just issue the same slight warning here that I want to make sure we stay on topic with the fuel tax. This is somewhat associated. It's loosely associated, I'll say. So maybe this does get into the afternoon a little bit more, and I believe we'll probably have a very robust discussion about the efficiency study. But Director and/or Dennis, if you guys have just a brief comment on that.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I don't know that anybody can answer this question, but I'll give it a shot. All I can say is from the last 6 months that I've been there, there's been a lot of those questions being discussed. We can't consider doing the exact same thing over and over and over and expecting a different result. And so there is so many times that I hear out of the box thinking in a conversation that is like a common thread conversation that we can't stay complacent. And so all ideas are on the table right now. We're discussing them, vetting them, doing the calculations on them, seeing the feasibility of the, whether it be financial efficiency, time efficiency, capable efficiency, all those things have to play into it. And so, yes, I guess we're looking into a lot of different things right now, whether it be Representative Haroldson called me up and said, have you looked at marketing to farmers and ranchers to be snowplow drivers? Some of them could be looking for something to do in the wintertime. Could you put them on a list? So all of those ideas are coming into play when we're trying to solve our problems. And I really appreciate the, again, out of the box thinking when it comes to how to solve the problems, because it's going to take a lot of people coming up with some crazy ideas that we've never thought about and seeing how we can implement them to make the agency successful, which in turn, the impact of the agency's success is so impactful to the citizens of Wyoming and the traveling public. And so I appreciate that comment. And I guess short answer is yes, we're looking at everything right now because not because we should do it. It's just out of necessity. We're at that point where we need to be doing that.
Yes, Senator Pappas,
Yeah.
and then we're going to move on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to that point, I really have a concern with privatizing a lot of the services that YDOT provides. You know, while we all know that typically the private sector can usually do things more efficiently, right? Government never does anything efficiently. But there's also the factor that if you privatize, you throw in a profit factor. And also, you lose a lot of control. I mean, a lot of states have privatized their prison systems, and they've run into all sorts of problems with privatized prisons. And so while it's something we should look at, I believe, I think it's bigger than YDOT looking at it. I think it's probably us needing to make that kind of decision to go forth and do a study like that to privatize not only services that YDOT does, but many other agencies as well. That may be that's probably a bigger fish to fry than we can here just in the Transportation Committee, but always good to look at. But I think there's a lot of issues with privatizing some government services.
And we're going to finish up with this. I notice that you guys do have an additional page that was sent out, and I don't know if it relates to this or if it goes on, but this was the interstate costs. Did you guys want to cover that now, or is that in association with something else later on?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that was probably a conversation that was had at the last meeting to try to wrap up or clarify some of the comments that were made about what is the percentage of the road system on I-80, I-25, I-90, and then also how much our revenues go, the percentage of the revenue goes towards that. And it's in your packet. I think it was, we were able to answer it kind of on the fly last time, but I just wanted to, in the submission, wanted to just have it in your documentation.
Okay. Yes, Representative Berger?
So just on increasing the tax, a fuel tax, or looking at an increase of the fuel tax, does that solve all the issues for funding?
Mr. Chairman, I'd say, thank you. Representative, no. Just looking at what Dennis was talking about, even if we stick with the standard number, we're 252 million after the IIJA extra funding that we got. So we're still down 250 million. Even if you guys were to look at the fuel tax increase by 20 cents, we're still short, which is not overly palatable. So we are constantly looking and talking with our stakeholders about other ideas. I know Representative Overmiller brought forward a conversation last year regarding the caps on the federal mineral royalties and the severance tax. Some of the efficiency conversations went into indexing our fees and our license plate fees, our registration fees, to try to keep up with that inflation. So there's a lot of things that we're looking at and trying to have those conversations, because I think Dennis said that, or maybe Senator Pappas said that the fuel tax is not a sustainable fuel revenue source. As things become more efficient, the alternate fuels come into play, the fuel tax is nationally going down. And so that's not a long-term sustainable funding model. And so we have to constantly be looking into other ways to shore up that leg of revenue to ensure that we can be successful with our mission at YDOT. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on. I just want to make sure we stay on agenda here. And so I appreciate YDOT and appreciate the committee's questions. I believe we have Energy Marketers of America. Do we have anybody here representing? I'm not seeing anybody rushing to the microphone. So with that, we are on just the fuel tax administration. I'll remind the committee. So we're going to open this up for public comment before we move into the actual diesel tax bill, and we'll have LSO go over that. But please, public comment on the fuel tax administration. And committee, I do believe we have a memo that was just passed out, and we'll have this explained to us a little bit here. So please, if you would introduce yourself for the committee, for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Dallas Scholes, and I represent Par Pacific Holdings. We are the owner of Wyoming Refining in Newcastle. We're I want to say we're one of the smaller refiners in the country, but we are primarily provide fuel to Wyoming and are focused to the general areas. We go into the Rapid City market, but mainly our customers are in Wyoming. This is applicable to the previous discussion because it is about the effective administration of the fuel tax administration. I want to first off thank Dennis and his team. My tax guys came up with an issue on responding to requests for information from the administration. We have 4 guys that work this. They're sitting in Houston. We have 4 refineries now, and the current statute allows for 10 days to respond to any request for information. And it's kind of onerous when you've got a small shop and you have to go back and find a whole lot of data. And these 10 days do not give any concession for holidays, FMLA, or any other thing that goes on in anyone's lives. They're pretty strict. And we've tried to work with the administration, and they've been very good about that. But they came to the conclusion that the statute is the statute, and we have to comply. So in order to be in compliance and to have an efficient administration on the side of the Department of Transportation, we discussed the ability of changing that from 10 days to 15 business days. That still gives us time to respond in a timely manner and gives them time to get the information they need without creating any backlogs.
Committee, any questions? Yes, Representative O'Hearn, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Why was the statute set at 10 days originally? Is there something I heard on the other end of the dais? We got to look at both sides of the issue. Why was it set at 10 days originally? Thank you.
Dallas, if you have the answer.
Mr. Chairman, I do not know. We actually were trying to find out why it was set at 10 days, and we couldn't find.
YDOT, do you guys by chance know, Dennis? You can just shake your head, that's fine. You don't have to come back up, okay. The answer was no for the those watching out online. Dallas, thank you. No further questions for Dallas? Okay, Dallas, appreciate it, thank you. All right, any other further public comment on the fuel tax administration? Nobody's rushing. All right, we'll go ahead and close this up then, and we will move in a few minutes early into the diesel fuel tax bill. Oh,
Any discussion on that?
oh, sure, yeah. Committee directives on this, yeah, you bet.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I like these sorts of bill draft ideas where there seems to be consensus among everybody affected. We do have a handout, it looks like, that would get a bill draft going, that would change that 10 days to 15 business days. So I would move that we authorize a bill draft for consideration at our next meeting, so we can, and maybe we can get an answer, a little bit more, history, and maybe find a reason why that's 10 days. But for now, I think we need to get that going, so.
Okay, moved by Boner, seconded by Stivar. Any discussion on the bill draft for our next meeting? Yes, Senator Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just, and also to get information on what would be the negative side of going to 15 business days as opposed to 10 days straight up. Just, is that the right number, I guess is, thank you.
And I think just for a little bit of discussion here again, I think YDOT has been consulted on this. I think everybody has been discussed on this, but I do think for the bill draft consideration, it'd probably be good to have a little bit more discussion for the committee's sake as to what the implications of that are. But any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the motion by Senator Boner, Chairman Boner, to have this as a bill draft, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. Okay, so you guys have that as a directive. Any further committee directives on fuel tax administration? All right, now we will move on. Thank you, Co-Chairman, for keeping me in line there. Brian, I believe this is you again, and this is for the committee 24 LSO 0090, the diesel tax fuel amendments.
Yep, Mr. Chairman, this is, you should have working draft 0.6. This is 3-02 in the meeting materials. This is the bill draft that the committee requested in May. In short, it would increase the diesel fuel tax by some yet to be specified amount. That was in line with the motion for the draft. And it would authorize a process for persons whose vehicles are registered in Wyoming to seek a refund of that increased diesel fuel tax amount up to the amount of registration fee that is paid by that user. So jumping into the bill, the change on page 2, line 12, this is just a conforming amendment concerning the inability to recover license taxes due from a bulk sale. They would be able to credit that amount of unpaid taxes against a later remittance. Page 2, line 20, this is a decision point for the committee to a conforming amendment to change the total amount of the tax. Paragraphs 1 and 2 on page 3 simply outline the current tax. So it's 24 cents split by a 23 cent per gallon tax on all fuel, and then the 1 cent per tax, which is for the underground storage tanks that was previously discussed earlier. Page 3, line 24, this is the new incremental tax amount that would need to be filled in by the committee. The staff comment on page 4, 2 main points here. First is just a note of consideration for whether providing the opportunity for refund to in-state users may impact the state's participation in the International Fuel Tax Agreement. And then the second point of that staff comment is that there are currently exemptions to the tax that are listed in statute. Those are on pages 5 and 6. And the question for the committee would be whether the diesel fuel that is currently exempted from either the general fuel tax or the 1 cent fuel tax should be exempt from this new additional tax. The 4 exemptions are listed on the staff comment on page 4. And then the relevant provisions are on page 5 and the top of page 6. Page 6 begins the language for the refund process on line 13. And to run through this, the way it would work as drafted is any diesel fuel user who purchases or uses diesel fuel in Wyoming is eligible for a refund. The user, though, must provide information to YDOT that shows that the user's vehicle was registered in Wyoming. You have a year to submit a refund request. You have to affirm that the tax for which a refund is sought was paid for diesel fuel in a vehicle registered in Wyoming. I'm on page 7 now. The refund provided must be in an amount equal to the license tax paid, except it cannot exceed the lesser of the license tax paid or the registration fees that the user paid. And that language is on the bottom of page 7, line 19 through page 8. And then page 9, a user can seek a refund for more than one vehicle. The staff comment just notes whether the refund should be an amount equal to just the state fee, the county fee, or both. As it's currently drafted, the refund would be in an amount equal to both the state fee and the county fee. And then page 9 and the remainder of the bill is just the section of statute concerning the distribution of these taxes. There is no change to this section in the bill. It's simply provided for reference. And so it would follow the process that Mr. Byrne generally described in terms of the 75% going to the highway fund, 25% to, or approximately 73%, excuse me, to the highway fund, 25 to the counties and cities, and then the 2% administration fee. The effective date for administration purposes is January 1, 2025. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for questions.
Committee, any questions for Mr. Fuller? Yes, Senator Pappas?
Yeah, LSO do a fiscal note on this? I didn't seem to see one.
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, in accord with our process, we do not do fiscal notes on this. I would say, though, Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, Chairman Boner did request some information. And so there is, in your materials, it's 3-01, a short memo from Budget Fiscal that basically outlines what the fiscal impact would be for specified increases in the diesel fuel tax. It's a short 2-page memo there. But Mr. Chairman, I should also probably just caveat that by no means would be what the fiscal note says.
Yeah, and I'll also just, as far as a fiscal note goes, that's generally done in conjunction with the agency once a bill draft has been created, filed, all that good stuff. So instead of wasting their time and putting a whole bunch of extra work into this, if we choose not to move this forward, that's where Chairman Boner stepped up to the plate and asked for at least a rough estimate. But Senator Kolb, did you have a question?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I tell you, after reviewing this and thinking about it a while, the question I had is, can we, or I think in my point of view is, need to include language that clearly states that if any part of this reimbursement program that we're talking about with registration fees fails, that this said tax increase fails. We cannot, I would not vote for something that can be gutted by the courts and then we're stuck with a tax increase without a rebate program. That's my concern, Mr. Chairman.
Yep, Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb, you know, our general statutes say that to the extent, you know, a statute is held unconstitutional, you work to interpret it to leave the remaining intact. That discussion, that point would be, I think, a point of policy for the committee to decide how to proceed in that manner.
Yes, Chairman Boner.
And so follow up on that very good concern that we'd have to include language saying that this is not severable, basically. Is that correct? And so if one part of the bill fails, you know, scrutiny with the court, then everything goes away. We'd have to, but we can't do that. That's an option, right?
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Boner, I don't see why that would not be an option for the committee. But if that is the option, Mr. Chairman, to your point, that would be something you would want to expressly say in the bill, probably on page 3 in that paragraph at the bottom.
Any further questions for Mr. Fuller? Okay, seeing none from the committee. Mr. Fuller, thank you for the brief explanation. I believe that brings us up to Director Westby. Director, back in the hot seat for you if you'd like to go over the bill and any discussion you may have on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Definitely bringing in the brain trust on this one. They're going to be able to carry most of the water on this. But really appreciate your comments on the severability. If something happens, I would sure hate to be issuing refunds on something that we can't collect. So thank you for that comment. And with that, I think I'll probably turn it over to give at least the agency comments on this bill to Dennis or Wayne.
Looks like Dennis, I don't know who, you guys keep looking at each other,
Right.
shaking your heads. So
Well, we'll make it up as we go, Mr. Chairman. Again, Dennis Byrne, Chief Financial Officer with YDOT, and we did look over this bill rather extensively. In particular, Wayne and Kim did that, and I think that just to go over some notes that they came up with in regard to the overall bill. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Wayne for that discussion.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee. We had several,
that's
my
okay.
bad.
Yep,
Sorry.
that's okay.
Wayne Hassinger, Fuel Tax Administration Program Manager. On the bill, we just had several comments. One, it would certainly result in a need for increased headcount, just the potential number of refunds that we would be processing. Our estimate is it could be as high as 80,000 refunds, just based on the number of registered vehicles, diesel vehicles in the state. So we did some math, right? Not terribly scientific for sure. And that's how we arrived at the language, up to 6 additional employees. Now, those would be more entry-level positions where they're just processing refunds throughout the year. And another one of our comments, it shows how we'd like to attempt to spread those out so we didn't receive all of the refunds at one time. So our idea, when we talked about how many additional employees would it take, there's certainly a cost associated with that. We got back to the discussion about that 2% admin fee, that likely if we collected the full 2% on the 24 cents, we could cover all the costs associated with the additional headcount. So, and we used what we think is really good math to arrive at that conclusion. So it might not be 6 employees, it really might be 4. You know, it might be, but the potential is for 80,000 refunds. We might not get 80,000 refund requests. So, but we figured that that's probably how we needed to present it. Our other comment associated with the bill was just the timing of the refund request, that the bill as written says within a year. If we could say 14 months, so that gives them a little more time to get their packet sent to us without us having to tell them, oh, well, you missed it because it wasn't here within a year. And then we thought potentially in rules and regs, we could define annual. So then it's not January, it's not calendar year. So then we get 80,000 refund requests on January 15th. The annual year is associated with the month you registered your vehicle. So then your annual year might be every April. So then we're getting them throughout the year rather than all at once or all within a couple months. So that was our suggestion of how we could address that would make it easier for us to process them timely. And then the only other comment we had is potentially not even our comment to have, because we're not attorneys. We don't even try to be, but the question of, is there an interstate commerce concern with this? And other people are far more qualified to address that. But as it occurred to us, we thought we would list it in our comments, even though it's not under our purview. So I think, I'm looking down the table and nobody will look at me, so I assume that means I did a splendid job of addressing our concerns.
Committee, yes, Senator Boner, and then Senator Cole. Or I'm sorry, Senator Pappas, sorry. Senator Pappas and then Senator Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you have an estimate about what the average refund would be?
I think that question would probably be better associated for the county treasurers. I think they would probably have more
Maybe.
information on that.
My question is leading to, is it enough that people are going to even bother with it? I mean, if there's a lot of money at stake, I don't know. I have no clue. And that's, if we're creating something that people won't even bother because it's so little dollars, and we're having to put more FTEs on, is it worth it? That's all. I just don't know how much money we're talking about in a refund.
Dennis, did you have?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, to that question, I think in part, at least the way the bill is currently drafted, is going to depend on the amount that's selected. It's the lesser of the tax or that registration fee.
So convoluted, to say the least at this point, but Senator Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, to the question about FTEs and the folks you might need, I guess I assumed you could do this with automation and you could do it online. I don't know, why would you need people? Couldn't you construct a form online? Question one. Question two would be, could you outsource this and have it done less expensively by some outside group? Has that been looked at? Or Would you be willing to look at that? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, first question, we could certainly have a electronic form, but as with our other refund processes, we do have to verify that the receipt is actually for diesel. I'm sure there's artificial intelligence that exists that we could program something to do all of that for us. But that's as far as we'd certainly be open to that, how we would achieve that short term. But our other refund processes do require us to make sure they have the receipts, make sure they live in the state, make sure that they've provided that they are the kind of, whether they're an ag producer or they're in construction. So sure, I think technology can help us do a lot of things. I think it would be a lift to say, yeah, we could achieve those through technology right out the gate. Again, just the programming that we're doing right now for the EV, the proposed EV taxation, is taking a lot of time, and actually Kim is doing the programming and she works in fuel tax. So, right, I don't know that we even have the manpower to pull that off. As far as outsourcing, I like the director said earlier, I think we're open to anything. We don't feel like we need to own anything of some other entity could do it more efficiently. I think there are probably a lot of nuances associated with that we'd have to look into. So the long answer, right, because I just gave the long answer, is yeah, we're open to any way to perform the function more efficiently, and that would include technology or outsourcing it, unless the director says we're not doing that.
Okay, any further questions for YDOT on the diesel tax? Yes, Vice Chair O'Hearn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we're collecting more money and we're paying more money out, are we going in the wrong direction? How much of it is, if we're paying more people to administer the fees, it's not going to highways, are we going in the wrong direction?
Dennis?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I appreciate the question. In my earlier presentation, I had some numbers written down anticipating that question. So in the presentation that I gave, specific to if we were to rebate based on the percentage of Wyoming residents, so assuming full rebate, assuming that our estimates for diesel usage 38 versus 62 is correct, YDOT's increased net revenue would be about $1.6 million per penny. So there would be a net increase to YDOT, even considering the rebates.
Would that
Are we
also
getting is- I'm
include
sorry.
the 300,000 that would be, or the additional, you guys are collecting the 2% on the original, but the remaining amount of that 2%, is that including that as well?
It is, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Boner?
Yeah, and just to further, I mean, so we can kind of get an estimate, a rough estimate before they do the fiscal note of the impact. And if you read that memo, there's roughly 76,701 diesel registrations that we know of. You can divide that 1.6 number, by that amount and arrive at the average rebate per vehicle at least. And that's a little over 20, it's about $21 a vehicle. And obviously, there's some probably we don't know, that we don't know the type of engine that it has. And so it might be less, but I think it is important to have this conversation because I think we do have enough information to get a general idea of the fiscal impact, both on the agency and on the public. It's not precise, I'll give you that, but it's not like we're exactly, it's a scientific wag, not a wag. How about that?
Yes, Senator Culp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask a question. It's an open-ended question, but why wouldn't we just want to give a total rebate of the registration costs and not even worry about what you'd have to do in tracking things down for Wyoming residents? Why wouldn't that be a better solution or a simpler solution, a less costly solution? And one, frankly, that may be not challenged by interstate commerce clause, because we're just giving a rebate. It's up to us to give a rebate. I think if that's a choice we could make. But what do you think about that possibility?
I would venture to guess that they're probably going to be reluctant to opine on that. But I would also say, I think we have some county commissioners that would probably care to talk on that as well, just because the registration fees affect far more than just roads. And so when you start talking about doing a complete registration refund, that's where unfortunately the minutia gets into the way. But Director, if you have anything else that you'd like to add.
I'm smart enough to take your lead on that. But I agree with your comments, albeit selfishly, great idea. But realistically, the impacts would be so great across the rest of the system through the counties and the cities that it would probably be pretty cautiously advised not to go that route.
I don't think there's anybody that would be upset about it, but except for the county and local governments. But Representative Pendergraft?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is probably more of a comment than a question, and I've appreciated what Senator Boner, Representative O'Hearn, Senator Kolb have just said. For all the administrative headache, now if I'm remembering correctly, we first talked about doing this tax strictly along the I-80 corridor, and the argument basically went along the lines of, well, that creates a lot of administration headache, let's just blanket the entire state. Every bit of administrative headache that you guys endure, small businesses endure as well. They become cumbersome, they're already strapped. I really appreciate Senator Kolb's comment. If we're going to do this, let's make it as simple as possible and consider what does this mean to the counties? What does it mean, losing that revenue? Thank you.
And I would just ask, don't you agree? That way we're in line, right? So,
Mr. Chairman, we do agree with that as well. I think ultimately the easy button on this is just increase the fuel tax, right? Eliminate the rebate. That would be the easy button. It's probably not the most palatable button to the dais, but that's the easy button.
Yep. Chairman Boner?
I'd say a close second to the easy button is, a little bit, it'd be less precise, so I'll give you that, but just overall reduction in registration fees coupled with an increase in the fuel tax. And then we'd have to get in that discussion, okay, it's probably just be focused on that state registration fee, which is, I think the lowest one is for school buses, it's $25 a year, whereas the counties is based off the value of the vehicle, and it's gonna be hundreds of dollars. So we'd have a fairly limited ability if we don't want to dip into the county's section of the registration fees, which means we have a limited ability to raise revenue, keeping the idea that the whole goal here is to capture that user fee from out-of-state users who are not really, paying, I guess, their fair share, if you will. This idea, and we saw it with the diesel numbers, just that, that massive amount of out-of-state traffic is what we're looking at, and the idea of being focusing on commercial truck traffic, but it could be, for that 15% of out-of-state car drivers as well, and so we just have to run the numbers and what's the limit. If we're only going to be able to reduce that registration fee for our Wyoming residents by say $20, what's the limit? Is it only 2-cent increase in the fuel tax to have everything even out? And so we collect the user fee without impacting our Wyoming residents. That's the question. I think that might not to bias the discussion one way or the other, but I think that would be a superior way of going about it. Require a different bill draft, just increase the fuel tax, reduce registration fees in such a way that it doesn't impact, it's net neutral to Wyoming residents. So, and hopefully that'll help with some of the legal concerns as well. But I don't have a question with that, Mr. Chairman. Wouldn't you agree there's a second easy button in the room, Director?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, that would be another easy button.
Yes, Representative Berger?
But I guess my chairman, or Mr. Chairman, I guess my question is, what is that balance, right? Where's, it just takes some math, but it's probably there, right?
Yeah. Representative Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you guys do a lot of studies on how much impact you guys would receive per penny and so forth. Have you done how much of an impact it would have on your consumers that you would deal with? So like diesel, it seems like every product that we deal with is on trucks multiple times. So then would that also increase inflation dramatically more to the point where the companies you have for road construction, all their equipment and stuff like that, will that increase dramatically? So then, okay, yeah, you're getting an extra $1 million per penny, but for the construction companies, they're gonna really increase the cost even substantially because they're running a lot more equipment, and how many more trucks are they running? And so is it gonna have even a net negative unintended consequences, I guess, for every person across the state, you know, because to go from the farm to the grain bin, from the grain bin to the supplier to who's producing a product, back to a distribution center, back to the final retail, you know, every product we have, whether we're wearing it or consuming it in one way or another, hits a truck probably at least 7 to a dozen times or more. And so the prices of everything across the state, I feel, would just increase greatly.
I guess easy way to think about this, I just view a snake eating itself, right, perpetually. So Director or Mr. Burns?
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, conceptually, I totally understand the question. And I think what I can share with you folks actually came from a former member of the body, and he was an economist and smart guy. And what he noted and realized with the 10-cent gas increase is that you increase the gas tax by 10 cents. You don't see that at the pump. You see some fraction of that. The other thing to keep in mind is that the fuel is a market-driven, it's a commodity, it's market-driven. So it's not collected at the pump. So it's not like it's an add-on to the receipt that you get. It is baked into the overall cost of the fuel. And so what this gentleman found the last time this happened, some of you probably know who I'm referring to, there was a fraction of an increase based on the overall increase. So will it? Sure, theoretically to some degree. Will it increase some inflation? Possibly. Fuel is market driven, so that you have to, kind of factor that into the conversation as well. But I understand the concept.
Thank you, Mr. Byrne. Representative Pendergraft?
Thank you. I'm looking at this and I'm in a similar situation in the construction business where the market will only bear so much of an increase. So would it be fair to say then that if the taxes are raised, but the fuel distributors the market won't bear an increase compensatory to that, that they are then basically eating the loss and we're hurting them? Is that a fair assessment?
Mr. Byrne?
Mr. Chairman, I am not a distributor, and I don't know that I have the knowledge specifically to answer that question, but I'm sure somebody in the audience probably could.
I'm thinking we'll probably hear from a few in public comment as well. Yes, Senator Culp.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I've been in the fuel industry for 40 years, so let me be real clear about how that regional issue works. And you're correct. I agree with you anecdotally. That's exactly what happens. The issue comes down to, what the major oils are going to do when they decide to cost shift, because that was the question years ago when I was county commissioner. How's that going to impact folks? Well, I about guarantee from what I experience is it's going to be a fuel cost increase. It will be. Now, will the full brunt of it be bared by whatever the increased cost is by the 5 cents or whatever? Probably not, because they all make money because Wyoming has a lower cost to do business here, so they suck up the extra profits is what they typically have done regionally. That's a regional issue in our area. So I think that while there will be an increase and it will be an increase in cost, you know, it won't be the full increase. It hasn't been, I don't know, you could probably track that, couldn't you? We after the last increase, have we ever bared the cost of that tax increase typically over the years past the increase? Maybe we could have some information, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Byrd?
Mr. Chairman, we have tracked it very early on, initially, once the tax was increased. And I think what we saw, and we'll get the numbers to you because this is off the top of my head, I think we saw probably a 6 to 8% increase of the 10 cents on diesel and like 4 cents on the 10-cent increase on gasoline. That's what my recollection bears, but we'll get that information to you. We haven't tracked it past that because of the volatility of the market. So,
And I would say anecdotally, I feel like we asked this question probably a dozen times in the past 7 or 8 years, but I think I do remember the 4% was kind of the discussion a couple of years ago, about 4 cents at the pump. So, yep. Okay. Anybody else? All right, YDOT, thank you guys so much. We'll open this up for public comment. We are on, oh yes, I'm sorry, we have Trucking Association. I'm sorry, Sheila. Thank you. Brian is, Senator Boner's keeping me in line here today. I'm ahead of myself. And then we have energy marketers after that. Yes, I'm just on the agenda, not on the agenda, so I wasn't looking. Sheila, please, if you would introduce yourself.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the committee. Sheila Furch with the Wyoming Trucking Association. Appreciate the opportunity to visit with you a little bit this morning about fuel taxes in general and specifically the bill that's ahead of you. I want to preface my comments reminding you, because I think I did tell you this back in May, but just in case I didn't, or just to refresh everyone's memory, the Wyoming Trucking Association has supported fuel tax increases in the past. We were part of the grassroots coalition that worked to get the 10 cent a gallon fuel tax increase in 2013. We've also supported fuel taxes that have been proposed since then. But when we do support those fuel taxes, it's very specific. We know what the amount is that we're discussing. We support a fuel tax, not just a diesel tax. We feel very strongly it should be gasoline and diesel at the same level. I know other states do have a difference, but my members are very supportive of gasoline and diesel at the same level. We feel like there's already a built-in differential with diesel just based on the number of gallons a diesel commercial vehicle uses versus the number of gallons a passenger vehicle to go to the same miles. We also, at the time that we were supporting the fuel taxes in the past, we were supportive of do it once, don't phase it in, just get it done. That, of course, depends on the amount of tax we're talking about. If we're talking about a bigger amount, we're perfectly fine with phasing in a fuel tax increase. We have not taken a position on indexing fuel taxes. We're certainly willing to discuss that, but we want to know what the ceilings are, what the floors are, what we're really going to be faced with. Because a lot of times when you start talking indexing, there's too many unknowns. And for a carrier to be able to kind of plan what their fuel taxes are going to be, we kind of need that extra information. One of the big caveats anytime we talk about a fuel tax increase that we're going to support is that we'll support a fuel tax as long as there's no diversions of the current funding that's going to YDOT for the highways. We don't want to be able to say, yeah, we'll support this fuel tax, but then all of a sudden federal funding, federal severance tax money that's going to YDOT is siphoned off for some other reason, because that has happened in the past. So no diversions of current funding, no diversions of funding at any level, basically, from YDOT. If we're going to give them money, give them money. Don't take it away at the other side. So that's kind of what our history has been and how that then applies to the bill that's ahead of you. We've not taken a position on this bill because we don't know what the amount is. And we do have some concerns about the rebate being given. We understand the reason for it, and we have appreciated the discussion that's been going on around how do we do that balancing act of, we know YDOT needs more money, but we don't want our constituents to have to pay that bill. So we worry about another layer, maybe many layers of bureaucracy for the administration of a rebate. You know, the fuel tax administration right now is very I don't want to say simple, because I know the Fuel Tax Administration takes a lot at the state level, but everyone knows what happens, and we know how it's collected, we know how it's administered, and it's very efficient, and it's very inexpensive at this point to administer and collect those fuel taxes. This is going to make it much more difficult and more expensive. Even if we have to outsource, it's going to be another layer of bureaucracy. It's going to be another layer of funding that's going to have to come off the top of that fuel tax that we're collecting. So we do have concerns about that. I have concerns about requiring additional employees, and I know there's discussions about how to maybe make that not happen. But it worries me with YDOT struggling to fill the vacancies and the positions that they have open right now. If we're talking about having to provide more employees, that's a concern. In your initial discussion back in May, I was concerned that we were going down the road that would have Commerce Clause issues. I'm not an attorney, but the way I read the bill, this bill looks like the rebate is open to any user of diesel fuel. My concern with the Commerce Clause issue is when you start charging a tax and applying it differently to an intrastate carrier versus an interstate carrier, that's going to lead to a Commerce Clause issue. This bill appears to be open to any user and specifically talks about the IRP registration for and the interstate carriers paying the heavy equalized user fee. So I am assuming that it applies to everyone. The rebate applies to everyone. Anybody can apply. Basically, in my opinion, you're putting this tax out there, but you're letting the constituent decide whether he wants to tax himself or not, because if he doesn't apply, then he's paid the tax. If he applies, then he didn't. So, that's an easy way to just let the constituent decide whether he wants to be taxed or not. Is that a good way to do tax administration? I don't know, but I think it's something worth consideration. I do think that, Mr. Chairman, if you would allow me to kind of address the amendment at the same time. I know we haven't discussed that yet, but while I'm up here, I might as well. I do have some concerns about that may lead, I'm again, not a legal brain, but that certainly may lead to a Commerce Clause issue, because you are very specifically targeting a certain area of the state with known interstate travel. I worry about that. There was a state back east that tried something similar recently, not with fuel taxes, with another fee, and it very blatantly was directed towards interstate vehicles. And the trucking industry did file suit. They won that lawsuit. So far, it hasn't been appealed. We don't know if it will be or not. But I do worry that whole conversation about just trying to target interstate vehicles, I think it's important to understand IFTA and IRP. And just in a basic nutshell, those carriers that are driving across any Wyoming highways, interstate carriers, do pay registration fees to the state of Wyoming through IRP. They do pay fuel tax for the fuel that's burned in this state. So they are able to file and apply in the states of their domicile, but then those states factor out what needs to go to the other states. So carriers, I know there's that perception. You see all those trucks on I-80 and they're just passing through. They're not stopping, they're not fueling, and everyone thinks, well, they're not paying anything, but they are. So I think that's important to keep that in mind as well.
Representative Smith.
As far as if the fuel prices were lower in Wyoming, do you think the trucking association members would fuel up more and we'd get an increase in state revenue, as opposed to, if they're coming through Salt Lake, wait till they cross the state line and fuel up? Or does the IFTA kind of negate a lot of that?
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
Representative Smith, that's a good question. A carrier is going to look at fuel prices, because that's the bottom line, is how much they're paying per gallon for prices. They're going to pay the tax no matter what. So that part of it doesn't come into their determination, because if they pay 24 cents in Wyoming, that money is coming back to Wyoming at 24 cents. If they pay 22 cents in Colorado, 22 cents of what they burn is going back. So the fuel tax does kind of negate that, but they're going to look at the cost of the gallon of fuel for where they're going to purchase their fuel. because that's what they're paying for. The tax is going to be paid no matter what. The difference is how much I'm going to pay in Wyoming, bottom line, over the other states.
Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a very quick question that, not directly related, but very closely. In my business and in my personal life, insurance rates have just exponentially increased over the last few years, and they blame inflation as well. Are your members seeing a marked increase in their insurance rates? And if so, do you have an idea of percentage? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Pendergrass, yes, they are seeing a marked increase, but it's not new. They have seen perpetually large increases over the last decade. I can't tell you what that percentage is, but I know that's a huge issue for motor carriers. And there are, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, and there are fewer and fewer insurance carriers that are offering insurance coverage for motor carriers as well. And that makes it challenging for carriers.
Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, we're here this morning because we don't have money for our roads, right? And so we have to increase our revenue somewhere, right? And no one wants to see more taxes. What would your industry think if we didn't even talk about raising fuel taxes, but do what other states like Colorado I mentioned, put a delivery fee on every delivery? Of course, it would be not only truckers, but it would be anybody, DoorDash. It would be anybody who delivered, who used the roads. What would your industry think about that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, we'd be willing to discuss that. I think that's part of where we might need to be going with a lot of this discussion. My colleagues in other states, because we get together regularly and talk about highway funding and what they're doing in their states, and the states that have been successful in really trying to stabilize what's going into their departments of transportations have taken a look at an entire transportation package, that maybe it's a small fuel tax increase and package delivery and 3 or 4 different other things, sales tax on highway related things, tires, oil, windshield wipers, that type of thing. So it's not a big bite of anything, but it's several different things all at once to consider in an entire package, so that it isn't so onerous on everybody for every single tax or fee. But we'd be certainly, I don't know what their reaction would be, and it's not something we've discussed in the past, but certainly something we'd be willing to discuss.
A follow-up.
Follow-up, not related. I just wanted to, I just came from the NCSL conference, and your ATA folks out there, Virginia Bulger was one of them. I don't know if you know Virginia, but anyhow, they had a great booth out there.
Oh.
Anybody else have questions for Ms. Furch? Seeing none, thank you, Sheila.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Further, we have the energy marketers. We had them not raise their hand as we came through the last one, so I'm just going to make sure. Not seeing anybody rush, and we don't have anybody online, correct? Well, not for energy marketers, though? No, okay. All right, with that, then we will open this for public comment. And what I'll do is I will ask anybody who has public comment, please fill the seat so we don't have to continuously recycle and wait for people to stand up, sit down. So please fill all 4 chairs, and when one opens up, if you're interested in speaking, please come forward. Before you speak, just introduce yourself and your title, and please. Emily, it looks like.
There we go. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee. I am Emily Parvasini, Sublette County Treasurer, representing the County Treasurers Association. I wanted to address Senator Kolb's question earlier about registration costs. I did the math, and if you have a $80,000 F-350 that's brand new, the registration is about $1,530 the first year. 90 of that goes to the state as the state fee based on the weight of the truck, and $1,440 goes to the county. If you have, say, a 7-year-old pickup that's a diesel, that's same F-350 that you paid $35,000 for, your registration is $250, $247.50, $157 of that goes to the county and $90 goes to the state as part of the state fee based on the weight. The important thing to remember, Mr. Chairman, is that the county portion is not kept solely by the county. That cost, that revenue that we collect is distributed to the schools, the libraries, the rec centers, the museums. Everybody gets a little piece of that. So when you talk about refunding the county portion, all of those entities are then affected by that refund that's given. If you're talking about large commercial intrastate trucks that license their semis in county, in state, those registrations can be as much as $3,000 or $4,000 based on the MSRP of the truck and the weight of the truck, load and trailer. And if they don't have any mileage discounts or discounts that are offered through the county. So again, not the percentage that would go, just to the county, I believe is about 17% based on the mill, but it gets distributed to all those entities every single month when we distribute those funds that we collect.
Any questions for Ms. Parvasini? Yes, Chairman Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So would it be correct to say that as we consider all these different options, it greatly simplify our efforts if we avoided dipping into the county's portion of registration fees? We kept it just at the state registration fees.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Boner, yes, definitely would be much easier if you only considered the state portion and not the county portion.
Okay, anything for, yes, Mr. Smith or Representative Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So quick question from county perspective, collecting a bunch of different types of fees. Is there any areas that you see gets overfunded that could potentially get cuts and move things around?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Smith, the lion's share of what the counties collect goes to the schools. And honestly, I don't know that any of us want to cut funding for the schools. Sublette County, which is my county, we're a recapture district, so we collect a lot. But then those schools then have to turn around and send it to the foundation, to the state, and it gets then redistributed to the counties that don't have the minerals that our county does. So as far as real cuts, when we're talking about inflation, everyone is seeing it. Everything is more expensive. Running the lights and the heat in a building is more expensive. And that's what a lot of these fees cover, is literally the day-to-day operations of a library, of a museum, places that don't charge a whole lot of money or any money to the general public, and their main source of revenue is the fees that we collect.
I will just follow up with that. A lot of those fees that are also assessed are also voted on by the voters. The mills that are imposed for a lot of these hospital districts, those types of things that do have those property taxes are ultimately voted on by the voters. So the ability to cut those would then go back to the voters on that as well. So, okay. Ms. Parvasini, thank you so much for making the trip over the mountains. Appreciate you being here. Yes, County Commissioners Association.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Jonathan Russell. I'm a policy analyst for the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. With us today is Commissioner Ryan, and he has some prepared statements to talk to you about.
Commissioner Ryan, please.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Tom Ryan. I'm the co-chair of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association Transportation and Veterans Affairs Committee, and a chairman of the Hot Springs County Commission. I'm also the president of Ryan Brothers Trucking, a Thermopolis-based company moving resources to build our roads, heat our homes, and feed our communities, and is also celebrating its 65 years in business in Wyoming. Counties are on the front lines ensuring Wyoming residents and visitors receive basic services, including quality transportation infrastructure. Before getting far, the WCCA hasn't established a position on 24 LSO 0090. In the past, the WCCA has supported increases to the diesel fuel tax or fuel taxes more broadly. 24 LSO 0090 is a weird beast. These were comments from Jeremiah, by the way. Unamended, counties may see additional funds from this law. For background, under current distribution, county receives 20% of the total diesel fuel tax collected statewide, approximately 16.7 million in fiscal year 22. Hot Springs County receives approximately 190,000 annually in diesel fuel tax revenue. Consistent with Wyoming Constitution, we utilize these funds to construct, reconstruct, maintain, and repair county roads and bridges. If Wyoming's diesel fuel tax is increased 10 cents under the law, according to LSO's estimate and not accounting for refunds, counties would receive approximately 4.9 million. Hot Springs County would see an additional 49,000 diesel fuel tax revenue. That's not insignificant. That said, the administrative impact could be significant and further could create repercussions for state and local governments, if not also private and commercial users. It's also unclear whether the law presents Commerce Clause issues. We have one recommendation: add a new provision on page 9, line 6, or wherever it's most appropriate, that states any refund for any overpayment or for any other refund authorized by the tax imposed shall be taken from the tax collected pursuant to the Wyoming statute. We believe this is consistent with the committee's intent, however, it's best made clear. If, however, the intent refunds come from county registration fees, these are more serious administrative and fiscal consequences from this legislation, which likely includes our opposition. Finally, we recognize I-80's in disrepair. Wyoming's other roads, community, municipal, and state, also require investment. We're in preservation mode. Advancing any fuel tax increase is always difficult, sometimes impossible. We are concerned passing Chairman Boner's amendment may impede future investment in Wyoming's roadways outside of the I-80 corridor. As such, we request the committee not advance the amendment. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my testimony, and I stand for questions.
Commissioner Ryan, thank you. Any questions for the County Commissioners Association? Yes, Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ryan, as a former resident of the community of Thermopolis, I am aware of the Ryan Brothers Trucking and what it means to that community. It's been a stalwart pillar of that community for a long time. So my question has to do with the balance from the perspective. You're in kind of a unique position on both the county commission and being a business owner. You see both sides of that. It's my understanding that your company lost a substantial amount of revenue due to road closures. In your estimation, if it's fair to ask, would it be better from your company's perspective to pay a little bit more in tax with the hopes that maybe the roads would be open more? Or can you address that in any way?
Commissioner Ryan, if you want to take off one hat, put on the other, you're more than welcome to.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, the Ryan Brothers Trucking is not opposed to a diesel fuel tax as long as it's going back to YDOT. We see tremendous benefit from YDOT, and I don't know, paying more taxes would have lessened the impact of the winter. And it was a brutal winter, and it did cost us some money. We had a lot of trucks sitting around that could not work. But if there's more money coming to YDOT, we're not opposed. The diesel fuel tax, the increment that it raises. My fuel jobber last night told me that fuel prices went down 10 cents last night. So, a 5-cent diesel tax or a 10-cent diesel tax, nobody likes to pay more taxes, but in the price of fuel, when it was 24 cents and fuel was at $1, it seemed like a pretty big tax. When fuel's at $4.50, 10 cents doesn't seem quite as so we're not opposed. I don't know that it would have impacted. I don't know if you had a whole team of people that you would have opened 287 going into Rollins in February. So
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for that qualification at the last, because I just wanted to make sure that I heard from you that there's some dubiousness on your point in your mind, that even if these taxes were increased and they had more people to go out and clear the roads, sometimes it is the way that it is. Is that your view? Is that I think I heard you express twice?
it is. I know that I talked to YDOT quite a little with our local districts and some of the issues they were having at Muddy Gap last winter. But I also had drivers that were telling me that there was snowdrifts taller than their truck alongside the road. So by the time the plow came and went back, it was closed. So YDOT stood the brunt of it, but it was the weather. So.
Any further questions for the county commissioners? Yes, Chairman Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, I'm glad you brought up the amendment that I have proposed. This was came from our management council. I think the idea was, the discussion was that there's an impression that, say, the state of Utah had a similar provision where if you're within a certain amount of distance from the interstate, that there's somehow is variable diesel, fuel tax increase. I can't help but wonder if that's just the market, kind of, we see that difference in between price of gas at something that's close to the interstate. It's going to be about 5 to 10 cents more expensive than something that's in the middle of town, and that's just because I think that's supply and demand at play, not necessarily a different policy decision. So I think we heard a little bit from the Trucking Association. I just want to hear from somebody who's in the industry. Are you aware of any similar provision anywhere, in Utah or any other state where they actually tax the gas sold at a location closer to interstate more than anywhere else?
Mr. Chairman,
right?
I don't know of any. They talk about IFTA and IRP. I understand both those mechanisms quite well. And when you file your IFTA tax, we file it to Wyoming, but you account for every state you run. I don't know how you would. There isn't any differentiation in the fuel tax. The price of the fuel might be a little higher because it's too hard to get downtown to the Maverick in a truck. It's those kinds of things you might see, but that isn't any. I don't believe that's anything to do with the tax. I think that's more of a marketing from fuel jobber. I mean,
absolutely.
He's able to sell 1 million gallons at a little bit higher price.
Right. I think that's important that we flesh that out, since that was part of our direction given to us from higher up. I just want to make sure that we have our facts straight and the committee's done its due diligence. I know the amendment has my name on it, but that's why I asked for it. So
Jeez, Chairman Boner. Representative Berger.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thanks. And I agree with the good senators and co-chairman's comments there. And just to add to that, I know what I pay where I'm from in the corner of the state in Evanston. And then I get here and I see what the cost of fuel is, and I'm thinking, is that because the taxes are lower here than in Evanston, or is it because of the profit? what those people can make right there in that corner of the state along I-80. And yes, I do agree, Mr. Ryan, that if we're going to collect tax, where should it all go to? And it seems like we just throw a lot of it onto I-80, but I also agree there are some state highways and state roads that need to also be fixed. And we can't just throw everything to I-80, which that is an issue, and that's where a lot of people travel, and they'll know how I-80 is this weekend when they travel to watch the Cowboys play, because there's some spots that aren't getting fixed. But how do we tax and how do we gather fees to make it fair for everyone? Because they're not, those profitable companies, they're not making it fair to everyone. Am I right?
Commissioner Ryan, if you'd like to opine on that, you're more than welcome to.
I don't, Mr. Chairman, I don't know that there's a question in there. I'm not sure. The diesel tax, it is probably as fair as it can be in that by using IFTA, they collect all those taxes from those interstate truckers. So to get the best bang for your buck, the diesel tax is probably the best avenue, because you do incorporate all those carriers that are traveling in Wyoming, regardless whether it's I-80 or anywhere else. I can tell you that if you tried to just tax I-80 from a trucker's point of view, it would be an administrative nightmare to try to, it's hard enough just tracking all the miles in every state we run, let alone trying to break it out based on Interstate 80. But, I don't know. I don't have a response for some of the other.
Okay. We are going to move on from the county commissioners. Thank you guys for being here. Really appreciate you taking the time to come down. General contractors. Ms. Little, please.
Mr. Chairman, good morning. Members of the committee, my name is Kelly Little. I'm the Director of Government Affairs at the Associated General Contractors of Wyoming. Historically, AGC of Wyoming has supported increases in the fuel tax, and in general, they support increased funding for roads. My members are on the front lines of Wyoming's highways and roads, and they understand the dire need and the dire condition that the roads are in. As an association, we have not taken a position on this bill, namely because there is no amount stated in the bill, no cent increase that has been designated. My members also have some of the similar concerns as the other entities have spoken about, including concerns about the intricacies and complications that could arise from a rebate program, how difficult that could be, and then also just making sure that the legislation passes the legal test related to the Commerce Clause and the Wyoming constitutional requirement for fair taxation. In conclusion, I'd just like to reiterate, generally and philosophically, we support increases to funding for roads. However, we're taking a wait and see approach on this piece of legislation just to see if some of the logistics can be ironed out and some of the questions can be answered. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will stand for questions.
Any questions for Ms. Little? Okay, thank you, Ms. Little. I know we have a couple of people online. I see Brett Moline, and then the other one I see is Mr. Downing. If you'll let them both in, or however you want to do that, and whoever's ready.
Mr. Chairman, Brett Moline with Farm Bureau. You ready for me to go?
Brett, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline with Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. I'm sitting in general opposition to increase in fuel price in fuel taxes. That's my members' policy. However, of all the proposals that have come forward, this one probably has the least sting, to at least have an offset of the registration fees, that would lower what you pay for in fuel tax. I realize it would be a rebate we've been using the rebate system for a long time. I think we can make it work. I realize that YDOT would probably have to have additional personnel, but we've been making it work, and it's improved a lot over my tenure with Farm Bureau. So I think we could make it work. So this, not really supporting, but I guess this proposal of all the ones I've seen has the least pushback from my organization. I would suggest a few amendments. One of, if they do have to increase personnel, that the funding of that would come from the increase in fuel taxes rather than coming off the general fund. That would be tied directly to the fuel tax rather than the general fund. I think that would reduce what we have to spend in the general fund for the Department of Transportation. A couple other things that I would like to see added. One of the problems we've had in the past with some of my members is the timeliness of getting refunds back. They say it has improved, but I've heard some stories of taking 18 months to get back a refund from YDOT, from fuel taxes. I would like to see something added in there that upon receipt of the form, that YDOT has 30 days, 45 days to get that refund back to the person requesting it. As I say, some of the horror stories that my members have told me, that I think holding Department of Transportation's feet to the fire, so to speak, would help keep, make it a little bit more efficient. I realize there must be, there is some potential drawbacks on this. I do see some potential improvements. In some areas of the state, we've got people that are licensing vehicles in another state than what they live in. I'll point that out in northeastern Wyoming. There's people that live, according to some of the information I've seen, kind of anecdotally, but people that live in Wyoming license their vehicles in South Dakota because the South Dakota fee is cheaper. And discussion that my member had, nothing's being done about it for whatever reason, but I think it could increase the number of registrations you have in Wyoming. Might be a net zero game, but at least you would get people to be following the law. I would strongly suggest making sure the off-road exemption for diesel fuel stays in there. Road that's used out, putting up hay, putting up grain, should not have to pay a fuel tax for the roads when they're not using them. Those are some of my main points. Without taking up too much time, Mr. Chairman, I would sit for any questions you or the committee may have.
Committee, any questions for Mr. Moline? Thank you, Mr. Moline. We appreciate your testimony today.
Thank you.
And Mr. Downing, I believe you're up next.
Good morning, members of the committee. Jonathan Downing, appearing on behalf of Colorado Wyoming Petroleum Marketers Association, and would just like to say thank you for taking up what's always been an ongoing issue for transportation in Wyoming as long as I've been around the lobby. It's one of those of how do you fund the roads when we continue to have these demands and needs. I don't want to repeat Ms. Furtz's comments, but I will echo support for those comments. Would also, just in the interest of time, just at your discretion, just bundle part of the testimony to cover the proposed amendment. With respect to that I-80 tax amendment, the concern I think that you need to take a look at, if that does move forward, would be the impact that you see between this bill and that amendment with taxation. And so when you have taxes collected at the RAC currently in Wyoming, there would be challenges when you get into the rebates, as well as also when you're transporting fuel to multiple locations, some of which may be within that I-80 corridor, some which might not be, and how do you account for that? And so Mr. Riemann did have, as far as that earlier quote, I do think that there are probably some better ways to take a run at this. In addition to that, issues with diesel and fuel tax. If you're going to tax one, you probably ought to tax the other at the same rate. That's one of those as far as historically, when you're looking at taxation there, that with Wyoming, as far as the sources of revenue available for our roads, fuel taxes are a key component of that. And back in I want to say it was about 2013, when we had the last 10-cent fuel tax increase, the one piece that that had helped smooth that tax out had been because you were collecting that at the rack or that wholesale level, you're able to smooth that impact out at the retail level. In addition to that, there had been discussion earlier testimony about the possibility of having YDOT personnel being funded out of the tax collected versus general fund, as far as the 6 additional positions that would likely be required if this tax is increased, as far as in this form and manner. With that respect, back in 2013, one of the key pieces that the legislature at that time had been pushing, as well as YDOT, had been to ensure that fuel tax that was collected at that time went directly back to the roads for the purpose at which it was collected. And so a lot of times, and this is partly for education for new members as well as the general traveling public, one of the key pieces when you're looking at registration fees, as far as that $30 to $70, which you might see that part going to DOT, the rest of those fees are essentially, they're not a tax for the purpose of improving your roads. They're a tax for the purpose of handling various things across state and local governments. And so with that, we do appreciate your attempt to address this on this end. I think you should also take a look, possibly if we want to do it the most simple way in the current environment, is probably to take a look at a fuel tax increase. The appetite for that realistically right now is probably not there, just as far as looking around the state and also seeing the challenges that are out there with providing those resources out to the traveling public. And so with that, I'd be open for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Seeing none here on the dais, Mr. Downing, thank you for your testimony. And with that, before we head into any committee directives, I think we're going to take a break, let the committee chew on this for a few minutes. So it's 10:41 right now. Let's make it back here at 10:50. So 9-minute break, and then we'll go to committee directives. We're at ease. right, we are going to call the committee back to order. I recognize we usually say 9 minutes and then we do the 9 minutes legislatively, and that turns into 18 or 19 minutes, but we're already a little behind schedule, so I do want to bring us back in here. Committee, based off of some of the information that I've heard, unless there's interest in overriding the chair's decision on this, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay this bill back. There's the potentiality that this bill could come back in the November meeting, but I highly doubt it. I think what we've got is, after some other further discussions, there's going to be some proposed new bills to bring forward to maybe make this a little cleaner and regulate kind of the interstate commerce clause issues, some of those things. So with the chairman's prerogative, I'm going to lay this bill back. And then what I'll do is I will open up the committee dais for any further committee directives. So committee, is there anything further that we would like to do at this point? Senator Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would propose a bill draft that would eliminate the state $90 registration fee for diesel. And with that, we would then have LSO working with YDOT to develop what the increase of the diesel fuel tax would be. I've done some preliminary numbers, and it looks to be 5 cents would yield a $10 million increase for the revenue for the state for the roads. So I would propose a bill draft that would remove the state fee of $90 and insert an increase, propose an increase in the diesel tax fuel in the state of Wyoming that would correspond to that. And it looks to be about 5 cents right now, but I'll let LSO and staff come up with a number that works. And that was off of 20,000 miles a year, 14 miles a gallon vehicle. And those are some rough numbers that I was using. But I think if we go down that road and make it cost neutral to the Wyoming residents without getting into interstate commerce clause issues, just straight up rebate for registration. I don't know how that can be challenged, but I'm sure it will. And then also make it non-severable in this bill, that in case part of it fails, that the whole thing goes away. That would be I'm open for discussion on this. This is my first blush at flushing this out, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, committee. So the motion on the table at this point is a new bill draft that would allow LSO to work with YDOT, finding the exact diesel tax increase. And this is strictly diesel tax. And then this would also be a reduction at the state fee level of $90 for diesel vehicles.
And Mr. Chairman, my question is, the specific reference to the 90, I take it the decrease would only be for commercial diesel vehicles and not the $30 passenger state fee.
I think it would be applicable for both 90 for commercial, $30 as long as it's diesel we're talking about.
So I think it would be easiest probably going into the registration statutes, looking at anything that is registered diesel, and then just reducing the state fee. So it would be, if we have a Volkswagen Jetta that's TDI, right, that $30 would be removed. Same thing for F-350 that's diesel powered. They would get their credited back as well. So committee, that is the motion on the table. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Senator Boner. Any discussion on this bill draft in general before we vote to have this brought forward for our last meeting?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Representative Wiley.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to question timing. Right now, my constituents are being hammered with rate hikes, and I don't want to take a wet blanket and throw it over the fire, so to speak. I think unless we review and we go into this outside of the box thinking and look at efficiencies and stuff, that moving forward with another tax that we've already been told, it's going to help with some revenue, but it's not going to solve the problem in whole. Might be a little premature. I would like to caution everybody just to think about that moving forward. And I don't know if I will be in support of raising a tax period. So I just want to put that out there.
Okay, I'll come to you, Chairman, here in just a second. We'll go to Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Representative Wiley. I'm prepared to offer an amendment to this bill that actually makes it a decrease in the tax. We stressed today that a lot of this problem was brought about by inflation. Inflation is in large part due to increased taxation and more government spending, and we create this cycle. This cycle has to stop. From a businessman's perspective, from a homeowner's perspective, we're facing unprecedented, at least the last 40 years, inflation. We're looking at insurance rates that are skyrocketing. We're looking at property taxes that are skyrocketing. Rocky Mountain Power wants to increase by 30% the bills for a large portion of Wyoming and many of its businesses.
Representative Pendergraft, I want to bring us back to this. I recognize where you're going for but I'd like to stay on the motion. And I heard that you say you have a potential for an amendment. Let's move on to the amendment, if you're interested in moving an amendment.
I'm not prepared to move that. I am prepared, but it's not necessary.
Until we see the bill.
Yes, until we see the bill. I just want to add to that the fact that we're considering a diesel tax at this time is unconscionable.
Thank you. Yes, Senator Boner.
Mr. Chairman, the previous two comments do not reflect the motion. So once again, this is a very simple concept. We're trying to make it simple, simpler to understand. We're talking about increasing the tax rate and reducing registration fees, so it'd be net neutral. So to turn around and immediately start talking about raising taxes is just not accurate. And I think we need to have a little bit better sense of professionalism on this committee.
Okay. Senator Cole.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a clarification. So the intent is number one, not to increase personnel, not to grow government itself and staff levels with YDOT. The intent is not to have it impact our residents and obviously lean towards a rebate of some sorts for what they're currently paying. That's the, I guess, the concept of the bill. Doesn't hurt our folks, it helps them. It doesn't grow government, but yet through the system of the IFTA, which was talked about, it will in fact increase revenue to the state from out-of-state people. Not one of those crazy ideas that the tax is paid by others. Because when it comes to like, travel and tourism, not like that. This in fact is an IFTA item. It has also a benefit that it will bring in people who are registering out of state because they're avoiding the tax issue in the state of Wyoming. It'll be incentivizing them to come back in the state. So I see a bunch of positives, and I'm certainly willing to talk about and have a debate on what is the perceived negatives, and then see if we can move forward with an idea of a draft bill. And if we don't like the draft bill, we can kill the draft bill later. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hold on just a second. I got Representative Stivar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since Senator Coe brought it up, is moving some of the taxation from the tourism account into YDOT to help with the roads. They're already paying enormous amount of taxes for lodging, and they've got a pretty good sized can there. Is that a possibility?
Something that would be probably worthy of discussion, but not quite on topic as far as the proposed motion on the table. So Representative Wiley, do you have something else?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just a little bit of clarification. I wasn't trying to attack the motion or anybody on this committee. I was just questioning the timing of it and making sure, that we look at everything before moving forward. That's all. And I have no intention of decrease or anything. I understand you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you want a road, you have to pay for it. I was just questioning the timing of it. That's all.
All right, committee, the only other thing that I'll say on this, since there's no more hands flying up, and just going back to YDOT's, PowerPoint information here on slide 5, if you just looked at the motor fuel collections funded by Wyoming residents versus non-residents, 62% of this 5-cent increase at this point, 62% of the increase would be bared by non-residents, 38% would be bared by Wyoming residents. However, I believe what the attempt of the motion is those 38% of people that would bear this would then have a reduction in their license plate fees at the state level, whether it's $30 or $90, however that's done. So I'm trying to just not for or against the motion. I'm just trying to make sure that this is nice and clear, that this is going to be an increase only in diesel, not fuel, not gasoline. And it would be that 62% would then increase, I believe you said back at the napkin, about $10 million for YDOT's road fund. So any further questions? Yes, Representative Pendergraft?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm guessing there's going to be some pushback from the counties if we start reducing the fees that they collect and that money goes to the schools. Nobody particularly wants to hurt them. I'm just asking that we look at, and somebody pulled me aside and helped me out here. Is there a problem with some of the other things like cultural resources that are receiving tremendous funds from the state that are not necessarily as imperative as our roads and highways?
Okay, so I will explain this as like detailed as possible so we make sure we understand what the intent behind the bill draft in the motion is. When you register your vehicle, you have a county fee and you have a state fee. This bill proposal would be to increase diesel tax by 5 cents a gallon. When you go to register your vehicle, if you own a diesel vehicle, that state fee would then be negated. It would be wiped off and you would not pay the state fee. All other county fees, which are the assessment at as a property tax, those would stay intact. So if you had a bill of $190 to register your vehicle today and tomorrow we pass this bill, that would be then $100. That $90 would come off. The state would no longer receive that fee. But in return, that 5 cents per gallon that's going to be bared by anybody coming from out of state, the IFTA, all those things combined increases the fuel tax collection to YDOT by about $10 million. So I think that's as clear as I can make it without trying to get any muddier. So any further questions? Okay, with that being said, all in favor of the motion to have this as a bill draft for consideration at our last meeting, please signify by saying aye. 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 All those opposed? No? No. That motion passes. So the committee directive, Brian, Talise, do you guys have any questions on that? Do you guys understand that one? Okay, all right. Any further motions from the dais at this point on diesel tax? Yes, Senator Broner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So similar concept, different way of going about it. As you know, we've heard today, the details are really important when we start, interacting with counties and everything like that. So the idea here would be to reduce the state registration fee by $20 on all vehicles, and then have a corresponding increase in the gas tax, both diesel and fuel, that would even out the for Wyoming residents, the decrease. By my rough math, that'd be 1 or 2 cents increase in the gas tax and the diesel tax. So same idea. Once again, this is not a tax increase on Wyoming residents. This is attempting to capture the user fee from out-of-state vehicles. So we want to make sure we understand the motion. Like I said, a little bit casting a broader net, but having a smaller numbers involved there.
Okay, motion is on the table. Is there a second? Second. Seconded by Senator Kolb. Any discussion on this? So this is just a different approach to make sure that we are capturing gasoline and diesel tax at the same time. Is that correct? Okay. Yes, Representative Berger.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And just to clarify, we're looking at many avenues right now, right, with these bill drafts. And they're bill drafts, correct?
That is correct.
Yeah. Okay. So that we can take a look at the research or our numbers and get that right. And if it's something that we like, then we can move forward.
Yep.
Right?
That's correct.
Okay. But they're drafts, right?
They're drafts for consideration.
Okay. So I just want to make sure that these are just drafts. So a draft, Mr. Chairman, is like just some ideas.
All right, let's move on. Thank you. All right, committee. All those in favor of the motion on the table to cast the broader net, this would be a 2 cent decrease or 2 cent increased-ish plus a reduction of $20 in the corresponding state fee. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. That motion passes unless somebody wants to challenge me on it. So that motion passes as well. All right, any further directives from the committee? All right, we will move on. Thank you all for your information, especially those that testified, helping us try to flush this out. Really powerful and really helpful in trying to make sure that we do this and do our jobs correct. So with that, we are on to our next topic, which is, I believe, the EV bill. And we're only 20 minutes behind, so let's see if we can pull this together here. This bill draft is 24 LSO 89. And Brian, is this yours as well?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, this is, you should have working draft 0.4. This is 4-01. In the meeting materials, this is a bill draft that the committee also requested in May. It is based on information that YDOT discussed and provided at the committee's May meeting. It amends how alternative fuel tax for electricity is assessed and calculated. It amends definitions and references to electric vehicles for taxation and fee purposes, and it authorizes positions for the Department of Transportation to administer this bill. So first on page 2, this is an amendment, more of a conforming amendment on lines 16 through 20, and the fees for the annual decal. It strikes the reference to a plug-in registered and licensed electric vehicle and replaces it with all electric. And that conforms with the definition that's later on in the bill draft. On page 3, line 5 is a conforming amendment. The change on lines 8 through 10 strikes reference to gasoline gallon equivalent for electricity, since that's being changed in the bill. The definition of dispenser would allow the department to designate any other alternative fuel as the point of, for purposes of a point of taxation. On page 4, the definition of gasoline gallon equivalent strikes the reference to electricity. Then on page 4, line 9 is a new definition of all electric vehicle, which is basically sounds just as it means. So a vehicle with no other source of power but electricity. It doesn't include a hybrid, a plug-in hybrid, a motorcycle, or a multi-purpose vehicle. There are definitions of charge and kilowatt hour. The staff comment on page 5 just notes whether the committee may wish to consider whether that definition is necessary, a definition of kilowatt hour. If so, there's an alternative definition that's provided or suggested on page 5.
Brian, hold on just a second, we have a question.
And along those lines, do we define what a gallon is, just to ensure parity? I mean, or is that just so commonly known that we don't bother?
I'll double check. I don't think gallon is defined, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Boner.
Okay.
Thank you, Brian. Please continue.
Yep. Then page 5, line 26 is the definition of public vehicle charging facility. And this is a plug at a public location in Wyoming to provide electric energy to an all-electric vehicle, regardless of whether a fee is required. And then for purposes of this act, of the taxation article on alternative fuels, each plug that may be part of a facility is counted as a single and separate public vehicle charging facility. The staff comment on page 6 just notes possible consideration for the committee whether a separate definition of a level 2 public vehicle charging facility is necessary. The reason being is that certain existing level 2 facilities in the bill would provide a charging fee instead of collecting and remitting the alternative fuel tax. So page 6, this change is on line 19 is just more of a conforming amendment to specify that there's a tax levied on the provision of electric energy for fueling vehicles. Then page 6, line 26, this change just notes that each dealer is liable for collecting the taxes, and each public vehicle charging facility must be metered to determine the amount of electricity that's provided for vehicles. Those vehicles, and now I'm on page 7, line 3, that commenced operations on or before January 1st of 2025, which is when the bill takes effect, must pay an annual fee. So if it's an unmetered station that's already in existence, already operating, instead of collecting and remitting the tax, there's an annual fee. Moving on to the staff comment on page 8, This was a proposed change from the Department of Transportation concerning alternative fuel used in aircraft. And the question here would be the tax, and this is on page 8, line 21, the license tax for electricity would be 3 cents per kilowatt hour. The change that YDOT suggested would make the alternative fuel for an aircraft taxed at 4 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's just something for the committee to consider. Page 9, lines 11 and 12 is a conforming amendment. Page 9, line 16 would require each alternative fuel dealer operating a public vehicle charging facility would pay an additional annual fee of $25 for each plug. Then page 9, line 22, each unmetered level 2 charging facility that was in existence and operating before January 1, 2025 must pay an annual fee of $746. That was an amount that the department calculated and can be able to explain. The remaining changes on pages 10 and 11 are conforming amendments to reference kilowatt hours. The staff comment on page 11, this is another amendment that YDOT proposed concerning the purchase of alternative fuel from a refiner. And the question is whether a reference to kilowatt hours is necessary given the definition of refiner, someone who produces, refines, manufactures, blends, or compounds alternative fuel. The remaining changes on pages 12 and 13 are conforming amendments. And then page 14 would be a similar refund process for in-state residents to what was described in the diesel tax bill. So that process is laid out on pages 14, 15. The only differences I would note, and this was per the department, no refund request can be made if the refund amount is less than $10. Otherwise, it's pretty similar to the same structure in 24 LSO 90. The one other change I would note is that the refund is limited to the amount of the tax or the annual decal fee of $200. The staff comment on page 16, 2 additional considerations that YDOT highlighted. First, whether there should be a reduced decal fee for hybrid electric vehicles to acknowledge the use of both gasoline and electricity. And then 3917-309D authorizes credit for the tax paid on alternative fuel that's purchased but not used in Wyoming, and the interplay that may have with the International Fuel Tax Agreement. Page 16, 2 definitions are repealed. First, the definition of a plug-in electric vehicle, and second, a provision that's being repealed. The 1 cent tax that YDOT mentioned earlier that is collected for that single penny, this would strike language in the alternative fuel article concerning when that tax would cease to be implemented based on the balances of the corrective action account and the environmental pollution financial responsibility account. So that provision is on page 17 would be repealed in this draft. Pages 17 and 18 are 2 positions for the Department of Transportation to implement this act, and then an appropriation of $257,712 from the Highway Fund to the department for funding these positions for purposes of implementing this act. Page 18 on the bottom has rulemaking authority and then a split effective date. The rulemaking and positions would be effective July 1, the remaining provisions on January 1st, 2025. With that, Mr. Chairman, I stand for questions.
Thank you, Brian. Very, very complex bill and almost one of those that we'd see coming out of corporations. So committee, any questions? Yes, Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple, I guess, questions of why we didn't include first hybrid vehicles and why they were excluded. Because when it comes to the electric vehicle definition, hybrids are not in there. And I think we're talking about taxation on roads, road use. So why wouldn't that be included? That's one question. And then the other question is a total rebate for electric vehicles using our highways in the state of Wyoming. I mean, why would that go to zero? I mean, if I understand what you said correctly, you could potentially have a situation where you paid nothing for the vehicle registration fee for being an electric vehicle. You could have that potential. And my question would be, for the staff is, do you think that maybe possibly proposing a number that would be like our surrounding states as a minimum, not zero, but say $100 or whatever is appropriate for an in-state user who I guess can claim that they wanted money back on their $200 registration fee. I guess maybe I didn't say that very well, but the question would be is why should that $200 go to zero? Why is that an appropriate position to take while we're trying to cover a very heavy vehicle using our roads? And shouldn't they pay something for that road usage charge? I'll stop there, Mr. Chairman.
Brian, I think those are actually probably policy discussions, but if you'd like to do that, and then I can certainly bring in my discussion as well.
Yep. So Mr. Chairman, Senator Colby, in response to your first question, there's no change in that annual decal fee itself. It's simply a conforming amendment. The way I would read it is that decal fee is currently paid by an all-electric vehicle. It would still be paid by an electric vehicle. In terms of the tax and in terms of excluding hybrid vehicles from that decal fee, I can't speak to that. I saw this as a conforming amendment rather than necessarily a policy decision on the fee and who should be paying that fee or not. A hybrid vehicle, gas electric vehicle that uses a public charging station would pay tax if they charged their battery at that station. So the tax is based on the amount of electricity that's flowing through those plugs, not necessarily the type of vehicle that is using those plugs. The remainder, Mr. Chairman, as you say, I think are policy considerations for the committee.
Mr. Chairman?
I would say just to follow up on that, and then we'll kind of come back to you real quick. One of the things that we discussed was there's actually the potential that somebody would pay more than the $200. It's just that when they would deduct the $200 back from the state, if they paid over that, they could ask for the refund of that $200 EV fee, but then they would also be charged the kilowatt hour. And so that's ultimately where we were coming with that discussion, is that they could ultimately be paying more, not just wiping that to zero and they're not paying anything. It would actually be a response to them paying more for charging their vehicle. So, Senator?
Yeah, just to follow up on that, except that they charged at home. Okay, that's where that's the part I'm trying to capture. They charge at home, they don't go anywhere else, then no, we don't get that. And that was the question I really had. Thank you.
Yes, Senator Boner, Chairman Boner.
Okay, and just to make sure we're absolutely clear, the refund we're contemplating on page 14, that's only against the additional $200 annual fee, which was sort of as a placeholder, I guess you will, for the fact that they weren't being charged any sort of fuel tax equivalent. So it's not, you can't use this as a refund against your registration fees that everybody pays. This is only against a $200 fee that only EVs pay in lieu of a fuel tax. Is that correct?
Yep. So Mr. Chairman, Chairman Boner, the refund would be an amount equal to the tax paid, but in no event more than $200, really. The fee amounts just used as a proxy amount. You could just as easily say it can't exceed $200. And Mr. Chairman, one additional point to a question Chairman Boner asked, gallon is actually, with thanks to Ms. Hansen, gallon is defined in the alternative fuels article.
All right. Yes, Senator Pappas.
Yeah, I just need a little bit of education. A hybrid vehicle, there is no plug in a hybrid vehicle, is there? Can someone educate me? Some of them have plugs?
So I think we will hear from Mr. Pickard here in a little bit.
I don't know.
Some of the lobbying groups. There are some that plug in. There are others that do not. The others that do not, they don't get charged, of course, that electrical portion. And when I was contemplating this original $200 4 or 5 years ago when we put this in, that was actually some considerations that were brought forward on that $200 fee was, should we be charging this on hybrids? And honestly, what I did find out through that was even our county treasurers were not uniform across the board on that, on who was being charged what. So I do think that that's an important policy decision, but I believe Mr. Pickard probably will touch base with that when we come up to this. So, any further questions for Brian on the bill draft itself? Okay, Brian, thank you very much for your hard work on this one. I know this was a very convoluted bill, so that brings us up to the director. So we have director, and we actually have two directors. So I'll bring Ms. Hanson up as well if you'd like. Bring YDOT and you guys all up together on this if you guys don't mind. Probably be easier to have you guys all together. There is, yes. If you guys would like to, I'm just thinking that some of these questions might come up and it would be easier to just go, but yeah, I'm thinking that probably just for time's sake, it might be easier to have you guys all up here at once. Director Resby, since you are up front, we'll go ahead and kick this over to you first, and then we'll bring everybody else over as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, apologize I didn't introduce myself last time, but Darren Westby, Director of YDOT. In light of saying phone a friend too many times, I'm just going to turn it over to the people that would administer this and run this and have worked with LSO to develop the draft.
Okay, looks like we're sending this over to Wayne and Kim, so I will let the one of you two, everybody's looking at you, so the hot seat is on you guys today.
All right, good morning again. Wayne Hassinger, Fuel Tax Administration. Mr. Chairman, where would you like to start? Because there's a lot here, and we love talking about it, so we could do this all day. So just any direction from you where you'd like to start.
Yeah, I think if we, I think basically doing the same thing that LSO did, if you guys don't mind, walking through the bill with your guys' considerations. I would say I'd really be interested to know your guys' considerations and the policy recommendations, maybe not policy recommendations, but the amendments that you guys proposed and the rationale behind some of those as you guys work through this. This is a very large bill, but I think everybody understands the general consensus of what we're trying to do here. So we don't have to get into the nitty gritty, but yeah, just basically walking through the bill with your guys' considerations as and we might interrupt you as time goes through if anybody has questions, so.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, committee, we'll just do exactly that. I think maybe the first comment would be on page 2 of the bill, where again, and Brian did a great job of addressing a lot of this. Our idea was we know more now than we did when we worked through and created our third article. So the addition of better definitions was kind of what we just want to make it better, right? So we kind of arrive at the all electric rather than the plug-in registered and licensed. We have no proposal or opinion about the $200 fee. Maybe some to just maybe further clarify, when it comes to that, the refund process, it is to bounce against, because it's only a Wyoming resident that can apply for the refund if they used a public charging station. We would not want to, there theoretically could be some Wyoming residents driving EVs that go to public charging stations all the time. We believe most people charge at home, but there could be some that use them regularly. We would not want to refund them any taxes they paid. They're above the $200 that they paid for the decal, because in theory, the decal is them prepaying their fuel taxes for the year. Did I say that? I just want to make it clear that we're not offering any refund to anybody other than a Wyoming resident that has paid registration on their electric vehicle. let's see, on page 3, this is where we start. Our proposal is to get away from the gasoline gallon equivalent as far as a means to tax electricity and use kilowatt hours. That is based in the evolution of EV taxation, where almost every state that's talking about it is talking about it as far as charging against kilowatt hours rather than the gasoline gallon equivalent.
Question here, Wayne. Senator Cole?
You bet.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wayne, just, did you have a detailed information about the calculation you used and how you came about with these assumptions for the equivalent of a kilowatt hour to say a gallon of fuel, or however you did this? Could you share that, or is that possible to get that information?
Wayne, if you have that.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, yeah, we have a couple. Here's the newest handout, and we punched the holes on the wrong side. So you got to start on the back of the page and then look at the front of the page. And I might have given them all away. Did I keep them? So you guys will have that momentarily. And Mr. Chairman, this is probably a good way to walk into this. And this is actually a replacement for a document we had provided to you that had a June 2023 date on it. And it's a replacement just because we added some information to it. So if you flip it over, so the 3-ring holes are on the right-hand side, it really talks about the concept being to transition from gasoline gallon equivalent to kilowatt hours. And it kind of explains how the gasoline gallon equivalent works. And again, in 2015, that was the measurement that National Weights and Measures proposed for electricity. So you can see there's a conversion factor there, and it complicates things. It complicates things for the consumer. It's for our programmers, it's just adding that formula into but it's not necessarily straightforward like it would be with kilowatt hours. So you can see on there that it explains that if the customer went to a public EV charging station and got themselves 74 kilowatt hours, that would be divided by the GGE conversion, which is 33.56, which equals 2.21 gallons multiplied by our tax rate, and they would pay 53 cents. Right under that, we listed how it would work if it were based on kilowatt hours. Same example, it would just be 74 kilowatt hours times 3 cents, and we'll get to that in a second, how we arrived at 3 cents per kilowatt hour, and the fuel taxes due would be $2.22. There's a lot of ways to arrive at these numbers, but what's important is another maybe example we could have put on here is a fully charged EV. That's a variable statement anyway, because they're so different. But in theory, a fully charged Tesla could go between 300 and 350 miles. It depends on the weather, depends on all of those factors. And a 24 point whatever it is, 2 average gallon, miles to the gallon combustion engine could go something like 160 miles. And so before they had to fill up again. And so the math works out to it's far more equivalent than the gasoline gallon equivalent. And I wish I could explain this more clearly, but potentially don't have the bandwidth to pull that off. But we spent a lot of time rolling around in this. And not only did we just arrive at 3 cents per kilowatt hour, that is, I think you'll hear from others too, that is pretty much the standard that's being used right now. On the back of that page, under concepts and arriving at the kilowatt hour tax amount, that is, we did some good math, and we attempted to explain it here. And that's how we arrived at the 3 cents per kilowatt hour all on our own. So we didn't just want to say to you, well, that's what everybody else is doing. We did some math to arrive at that amount. Be happy to have Kim answer any questions about any of that. Because, but we would certainly entertain any questions about this exercise if you have any.
Senator Gold, follow up on that?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, have you taken into consideration of the damage to the roads because of the weight of said electric vehicles? Being it's not just a straight up calculation about the fuel, but the damage they do, kind of like with diesels and semis and the weight that they have. Has there been any consideration interjected into this 3 cents that equates to the weight of electric vehicles? That's my question.
Wayne, if you'd like to answer that, I think that question will probably be answered in a little bit through industry. I think they have a little bit better information on that, because I do know that that has been contemplated in other states. But Wayne, if you have any more information.
Mr. Chairman, and Senator, it's not been a part of the whole discussion, because from a taxation perspective, we're in traditional fuels, right? They're measured by gallon. And the example here, we kind of went rather to how far could you go? Which is not a traditional way to arrive at a tax amount. So we did not go any further than that to speak to the weight of the vehicle. So I believe you're right. It's probably.
Yep, that's good enough. Any further questions? And then what I'll say, Wayne, on this is just in an effort, because we are a little bit behind, I'll ask you to hit the high points probably. And then what I'd like to do is, if you guys have anything that you believe was not addressed during the contemplation of developing this bill, I think that's probably what we need to hear more than a complete explanation, as we've heard from Brian. And then we'll come over to Director Hansen as well.
Perfect. All right, Mr. Chairman, I think we're done. No. Sure. Okay, Mr. Chairman, a great idea is to address the staff comments, make sure that we address all of that. So should we?
I think the first one was on page 8, kind of line 1, going through that portion with the proposed, and it's adding on that with the aircraft fuel tax, the 4 cents, just to make sure that we understand if we were to bring that into here. I don't know how many electric airplanes are flying into Wyoming, but probably worth the consideration, and I appreciate you guys bringing it forward. So maybe just the rationale behind your guys is catching these.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we don't know of any electric airplanes flying around. I believe potentially, if I could get to my notes, what we replied to LSO, we might not have communicated it well enough. We're not proposing that it should be 4 cents. We really wanted you guys to be aware of that. We don't know if you want it to be the same amount, less. Again, we don't know of any electric airplanes. I'm not getting on one when there is one, but
Okay, so I think better understood is you guys were just making sure that there's parity across the board and just making sure that we understood that as the policymakers. That's fair. The other one that I believe was the refiner discussion. And then Brian, I believe that was the only two that were proposed, correct? Yeah, so the refiner discussion and whether or not, I mean, I'm sitting here thinking about this and I'm not thinking there's very many electricity refiners out there that we need to consider this, but if there is discussion that you guys do believe is pertinent, we're all ears.
Kimberly? Thoughts?
Kim Peters, Fuel Tax Administration. We agree with that. We don't believe there's any refiners out there as well. Just for consistency within the statute, it was more, should we include that or not?
Okay, perfect. I believe that was all the major discussions, but Director, if you have anything further as far as the bill goes itself,
Well,
in your
Mr.
guys' discussions.
Thank you. I don't really have anything to add other than the refining side of the house and just the definition of refining. We have been approached by some companies that are interested in putting up their own electric generation. It's not really refining, but electric generation that would power charging stations right on the location. And so I don't know if that's where this was possibly heading.
And then I guess I would start to question how deep we want to get in the weeds with that. So, but Senator, Chairman Boner?
Yeah, and so I don't see an exemption for the laws, whether is it outside the definition of level 1, level 2, level 3 that we need additional consideration, or would the bill as drafted capture those facilities regardless of their location?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that it does.
Representative Stibar?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on these side electric generation, if they're using diesel engines, are they going to have to pay a diesel tax too? Are they going to use dyed diesel?
If they're purchasing diesel, they would ultimately pay that, yeah. So, Senator Kolb?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a clarification on that point. My understanding is if it's off-road, it's red diesel, and they don't pay the same amount of taxes as on-road diesel. Correct. So they'd be getting away with not paying any of those costs. Number one. Number two, the other question was, have any different considerations been made towards EV trucks as the consequence of a tax that may be different than a car? Or do you feel like you have that covered between EV trucks and cars?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I don't think it's been discussed internally other than a kilowatt hour is a kilowatt hour, regardless of whether it goes in a semi truck, commercial vehicle, or a passenger vehicle.
Any further questions for YDOT? Yes, Chairman Boner?
So we do have an appropriation and 2 additional positions. Can you walk us through why those are necessary? Is it because of the refund rebate program, or is there some other need? Please, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, it's for the refund process. Really, the administration of the tax, we've been working on the programming of how they will file electronically. So it is more about the refunds and how we would get those processed.
Yep, follow up.
So I have an appropriation from the highway fund, it looks like, about $250,000. How much are we expecting to bring in additional revenue? Do we have any estimate whatsoever?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Dennis Byrne, CFO YDOT. We do have some early preliminary numbers, and the numbers are based on current capacity. We don't know what the need is right now. We don't know what the demand is. It's really based on capacity. The numbers that we have now are anywhere from $30,000 to $80,000 a year. That's the kind of revenue we're talking about generating right here.
Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So could we get a possible cost benefit ratio of the total amount of EVs that are within the state of Wyoming and what 2 folks are gonna cost us for staffing? You know, I think that's the
Mr. Chairman,
cost benefit.
Dennis, please.
we're happy to provide that to you. Just clarification, because we understand that you need 2 people to really rebate these refunds. And these are numbers based on current available capacity. Every day there's more capacity being added in terms of the ability to adding level 2, level 3 stations across the state. So remember, that's what we're talking about today. We know that if the trend continues and that more electric vehicles are produced and used across the country, of course, that revenue is going to go up. I think the way to look at the 2 positions aside, the way to look at this is we're really trying to be proactive, and we're trying to get in front of what's coming at us in terms of being able to effectively administer taxation on vehicles that are coming. They're coming our way. So I think the 2 positions aside, I just want to remind the committee that it's coming. We're trying to position ourselves well to be able to accomplish that. That's the purpose of the changes within the bill.
Wayne, if you have a follow-up there.
Mr. Chairman, I think I probably should have added, it's when we've had so much discussion about this and how would we do this, what would we have people do? The additional 2 people would not only be handling refund, we would have a need to audit every one of these charging stations to make sure that they're performing accurately, reporting accurately. So there is a whole audit function. It would be far less complex than our current fuel tax audits that we do every month, because it's just going to really be based on kilowatt hours. So starting, ending, but we will, if we don't audit it, that'd be a poor practice. So I think not only would they be handling refunds, we would also have them auditing our customers, as we refer to them, the ones that are reporting to us every month.
You follow up on that? Yeah.
And so since you're talking about auditing and making sure that, I guess maybe just a little bit more detail as to what that entails. And my mind immediately goes to what the Department of Agriculture does with fuel, which is making sure that when you pump a gallon, you get a gallon, and there's that sort of audit. Is this different than from that sort of process?
Wayne, if you care.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, no, the certification of the pump, we still believe would belong to the Department of Ag. What we would be auditing is they're going to submit tax returns every month, and we would be auditing the accuracy of, so at its most simple form, if you said at the beginning of the month, our EV charging station for that nozzle read 12,000, and at the end of the month it read 15,000, and at the beginning of the next month you said it read 14,000. So we would be auditing to make sure the reporting is correctly, that we're receiving all the taxes due based on the kilowatt hours that come out of each charging station. The certification of them and making sure, because that is a very on point, and it's a discussion we've had, that if you go up to an EV charging station that says you're going to get 50 kilowatts out of it, are you really? And what we do know is if it's got two devices on it, when you plug both of them in, it's half. So making sure that the consumer is protected, that is certainly part of the process, but it's just not part of what we would anticipate doing.
Any further questions for YDOT? Okay, thank you guys. I know you guys work diligently to put this all together with industry, as we've all discussed in the past. I know this is a very lengthy bill and there's a lot to it, so thank you for that. I appreciate that. Director Henson, welcome.
Good morning, Chairman. Brenda Henson, Director of the Department of Revenue, and with me today I have Brett Fanning, who is the Administrator of the Excise Tax Division. And upon reviewing the bill before us today, 89, of course, you'll see that There are no administrative duties for the Department of Revenue, but it's my understanding that it was the committee's wishes to ask questions related to how electricity is taxed currently and to ensure that you have that basis as well. So just to lay the groundwork, no sales tax on fuel. However, there is a sales tax on the dyed diesel, as Senator Kolb mentioned, due to the exemption. The other piece related to how do we tax electricity and also what exemptions exist for electricity. And then we'll also cover one other item in statute that relates to fuels and how they are taxed and where those funds go. So with that, at the pleasure of the committee, I'd like to turn it over to Brett Fanning, and he will share with you how electricity is taxed. Please, at any time, feel free to ask questions.
Committee, if I, real quick, Brett, just as a heads up, and I think Brenda hit this on the head, that the discussion that came up last meeting, if you'll remember right, was the potentiality of double taxation, right? And whether or not we were hitting a double taxation issue by taxing at the, we'll call it the pump, the fueling area. So I appreciate exactly how you stated that, Ms. Henson, and that's exactly what we asked you to be here for. So Brett, please, the mic is all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Brett Fanning, Excise Tax Administrator, Wyoming Department of Revenue. And just a couple points here. So in our statutes, in our sales tax statutes here in the state of Wyoming, electricity is specifically noted in our definition of tangible personal property. So it is noted that sales tax is due on electricity when you purchase it. So in general, if you actually look at your utility bill and you see electricity charge there, there should be a sales tax associated with it. That would be the same thing at these charging stations currently as it's written. So right now, sales tax on electricity. The imposition statute in our sales tax statutes also says the sale of tangible personal property, which includes electricity, is taxable. So at these pumps, for lack of a better term, charging stations, they should be charging the tax to the customer on the electricity that they're using. Now, what we found in a lot of our research here at the Department of Revenue is that not all of these charging stations actually charge the customer for it, right? And so if you're at a, say, supermarket or a specific location, maybe it's a hotel that's included in the price of the bill, those are considerations to note as well, is if they're not actually charging the end user, how does that sales tax actually get to the state of Wyoming and beyond? So that's an important consideration. These we're actually licensing these electrical charging stations. I've seen a couple of these applications come across my desk because per our sales tax statutes, they are vendors. They do have to license with us. So that is important to note as well. In many cases, they can purchase that electricity without sales tax because they're going to be charging sales tax to the end customer. And in this case, it's the vehicle, the electric vehicle. So there is an exemption for these electrical charging stations to purchase the electricity from basically utility without tax because they're going to charge tax to the end consumer. Now, Mr. Chairman, this goes back to this concept is, okay, they're going to be charged sales tax when they charge the vehicle, but then they've also got to pay a decal fee to YDOT as part of the registration. So that would be at this committee's purview on how the logistics of that can work. And the Department of Revenue is certainly willing to have those conversations and work with the committee and YDOT as we have partnered in the past as well. So there is one thing in statute that I would like to note. So one of the tasks of my staff is to actually survey a certain part of the industry. So anyone who sells propane, butane, liquefied gas, and then compressed gas, we actually send those companies a letter each year. And we say, hey, how much sales tax did you guys collect on the sale of these products? And they survey into us, and it's commonplace when I've spoken in front of committees, survey responses This is actually one of our better survey responses. We get upwards of the majority of these companies respond to us on the amount of tax they collect from customers. At the end of the year, the Department of Revenue actually transfers 10% of that tax that they report to the State Highway Fund. So that is something to consider as well. Is that something the Department of Revenue and YDOT already partner together? Is there's a transition of tax based on a certain segment of the industry. Is that possible here? That's up for the committee to decide. But the Department of Revenue is certainly willing to have those conversations going forward. And with that, I will allow Director Henson to finish this up. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And one quick follow-up, that means that tax collection estimated at approximately 500,000 is what that amount was this past fiscal year. That's not new revenue. That's just simply taking a portion of the 69% that the state of Wyoming receives from sales tax and distributing that money to the highway fund. With that, we would be happy to answer any questions. Unfortunately, I'm not aware of exactly the types of questions you had at prior meetings, so.
Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am aware in our community, there are hotels that don't charge electricity for their customers. That seems to be a problem because then we're not collecting anything to help those out-of-state vehicles coming in here using our highways. How many hotels, et cetera, that you are aware of that are not charging for electricity? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Furphy, we do not have that type of information related to who is or is not charging. What I will tell you is if they are not charging an end consumer, then they're paying sales tax on the purchase of that electricity themselves.
So, and just to make sure I understand that, they're ultimately taking the hit. They're paying for it. It's just they're not passing that charge on to their consumers.
Mr. Chairman, that's accurate.
Mr. Chairman, to Senator Furphy, your question, part of this bill is to try to capture the electric vehicle tax back to the highways is by charging that annual fee at say that charging location at that hotel. Since it's not metered, that there's a annual fee that they would pay in lieu of the metered 3 cent per kilowatt hour charge.
Okay. Yes, Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just trying to wrap my head around this because my understanding is typically a wholesaler does not pay sales tax until after those things are sold. And I thought that was what was led on here. So if a hotel, for example, uses X amount of energy and decides to give some of that away, that's one thing. But what about a wholesaler? Can you help me understand what we're looking at here? Because if a wholesaler decides to give it away, then that seems like we have the gap that you're pointing at.
Mr. Fanning?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, Representative, outstanding point, and thanks for letting me clarify that. So in general, you've got a utility company here in Wyoming, and they're gonna produce electricity, just for lack of a better term. And they're gonna be charging sales tax to whoever purchases that electricity that doesn't provide them with an exemption certificate. So that utility is supposed to charge sales tax on any retail sale of tangible personal property unless they're told otherwise, which is an exemption certificate. So if that wholesaler decides not to actually resell it, they would be responsible for the taxation on it. So in effect, there should not be a gap because the utility company or a power generator or anyone who's selling electricity should be charging their customers tax until they're told otherwise.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So then there must be some sort of a mechanism that recognizes how much of this tangible asset which was purchased and how much of it they submitted a sales tax on, and then they're responsible for the difference. Am I following?
Okay, Mr. Chairman, Representative, yes, you're following, but I do want to clarify one more point. So if someone sells electricity, it is going to be sales taxable. Okay, so that's generally how it works, unless there is some sort of exemption available. So the utility company, if we're selling it to a hotel, okay, and I think that's a lot of the discussion here is that, okay, how do we make sure that that tax was ultimately paid? There should already be tax charged by the vendor. And so if there were any sort of additional markup or any piece along that, that would also be sales taxable as well.
Follow up, yep.
Okay, then my last question, Mr. Chairman, would be, apparently there's such a thing as an electricity wholesaler who does not pay that sales tax. If that entity were to give away that product, how do we know whether or not they're being charged for that? Thank you.
Director Henson?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, the situation that you have just articulated could be any product. So where we're at here is that if in fact that utility company sells that electricity and does not charge the tax, and then that customer actually gives that away upon audit by the Department of Audit, those transactions would be found and there would be a supplemental bill. Right, audit is the mechanism, not unlike any other product or transaction in the state of Wyoming. We do rely on self-reporting.
Okay, Senator Kolb and then Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to, I guess, I want to get a better understanding of this. So you said that 10% of that said sales tax goes back to YDOT. 10%. So we're talking like 0.4% if it's 4% they're collecting. It goes back to YDOT. What we're trying to do is capture the money for, road repairs. So the question is that an equitable amount to go back to YDOT? If you don't segregate said amount of monies, it doesn't seem to be enough money to cover what we're trying to do to cover the roads. I mean, so could you answer that? Does that seem fair to you? Or what we're trying to get at, right, is different than what your, normal day-to-day things are. So could you kind of elaborate that idea and talk about it a little bit? Thanks.
Director Henson, please.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb, and the statute that we're speaking of is 3915-111E. And it's just where the legislature has determined that vendors that are selling the products that Mr. Fanning mentioned shall provide to the Department of Revenue that information on how much sales tax was collected and remitted to the state on those products. And then the Department of Revenue shall ask the state treasurer to transfer annually from the revenues deposited into the state highway fund 10% of the amount collected under this article on sales of propane, butane, liquefied gas, and compressed natural gas. The transfer of revenue replaces highway revenues existing prior to the enactment of this act. So that percentage could be changed. It would be treating, if, let's say if we determined that electricity was going to be added to this provision, then it would just be treating those all the same. But again, it's not a new tax. This is just simply taking an existing sales tax and transferring those funds to the highway fund.
Okay, follow up?
Yeah, just to be clear, I didn't mean to, think that you weren't doing what you're supposed to do statutorily. Okay, that's not the question. It's nothing to do with that. I assume you are, and you are. My question is what you have finally alluded to is that really an appropriate amount? That's the question at hand. And when these were contemplated, these statutes, we didn't have the situation we're in now with electric vehicles. So it's a new day, a new issue. And that was why I was trying to ask you. I obviously haven't done research into this, but just what, it doesn't seem to be an appropriate amount to me. And I just wanted to hear your comments about that. And if you don't have a comment, I understand. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb, I would doubt that there's been additional research done even on the products that I mentioned. So if we add electricity to this statute, definitely there would require more research on what piece of that sales tax that's paid on those fuels should really be going towards highways.
Senator Pappas?
The director just kind of made my point. We really are not changing anything because sales tax is really not what we're looking at here. This is an alternative fuel tax. This is an additional tax above the sale of electricity. So I really don't think that discussion really, one way or another, the tax on sales of electricity is the tax on sales of electricity. Now, obviously, we could change that, but really what we're looking at is an additional tax on top of the sales tax in this bill, right? So anyhow, she made my point for me.
Yep, Senator Boner? Chairman Boner?
So along those lines, Mr. Chairman, for the department, it's my understanding in 39-15-105, paragraph I, C, there's already an exemption for gas, gas, because there is the gas tax, so we exempt them from the sales tax. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman, that is correct. We do not charge a sales tax on fuel. However, we do charge sales tax on the dyed diesel because there's no fuel tax.
Brett?
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up to that as well, there is something in statute. So there's an exemption for the fuels from the sales tax. Our tobacco tax statutes do not enjoy that same exemption. So if you go and buy a pack of cigarettes, it is both tobacco taxable and sales taxable, two different taxes. I just wanted to make that point as well.
So everybody's favorite topic right before lunch is taxes, right? So any further discussion from the committee for either YDOT or the Department of Revenue? Seeing none, thank you both very, very much. Appreciate you guys, everybody being here. Committee, what that does is that puts us right at noon here. We're a little bit behind, but what we're going to do is before we move into public comment and everything else as far as Mr. Pickard and the Auto Alliance, we are going to break for lunch. We're going to break for lunch at our normal time, be back at 1:30, and we will move forward with this bill after that. So we are in recess until 1:30.